Is this a fractal? What is going on, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome to another awesome episode of Faith Unaltered. I am just one of the, well, lovely. I don't know if I'm lovely or not, but the girls with me are lovely. Welcome. This is going to be an awesome episode. I do truly believe we're answering a question sent that I missed. I apologize. I screwed it all up. So you can go ahead and blame Tyler for this one. But I did not see our good friends Troy's super chat at the end of the last live stream. And so we decided, since he's such a good friend of ours and just an awesome dude just in general, we love you, Troy. This is our shout out to you by doing an entire episode dedicated to your question. And that question was, can or do the pagan and territorial gods rededicate profaned, holy, or sacred spaces? Or is that a Yahweh specific feature? And now, as everybody knows, I am not the Old Testament guy. These are the Old Testament women. And so we're going to let them have it. And I'm just going to jump in and ask clarifying questions if need be. I'll banter a little bit like I am now if I have to, which I doubt it because they always got plenty to say. And so I'm just going to sit back and enjoy this one, to be perfectly honest with y'all. But Troy, brother, this one's for you, my friend. I love you, dude. And so do we. So, Amber, without further ado, how have you been doing?
Sorry, I'm still getting over being a little sick and started school this week. So I am just kind of scrambling and doing really, really well. So I'm really excited about this one because this is all the things I love. This is Hebrew. This is ancient Near East. This is Leviticus. This is Exodus. This is Old Testament all day long. So and it is for a very dear friend of all of us here at Faith Unaltered. So that made it even more fun because it was for Troy. So yeah, I'm good and very excited for this. So
yeah, there's not really a lot of background. I mean, Troy asked us a super chat question and we said, you know what, we missed it. We'll get to this like in an episode. And this is the great thing about FUA clergy, which this is what Troy is as well. So if you go to our homepage and you see that join button by the subscribe button, you can click that, pay us $2.99 a month, or for the clergy tier, it's $4.99 a month. And you can ask us to do episodes and we will do them. Now, granted, there is a little bit of, I guess, leniency to that, but there will be a point, and we've already ran into one of those, that we have to say no because it's like crazy or it's not something that's going to be beneficial to people who listen to the show. We're all about having fun and doing fun things, but at the same time, like, we're not going to affirm false beliefs or, anything like that. So with that being said, if you're clergy, run an episode by us and we will probably more than likely do it if it's not way far out in left field. So that's a perk to signing up to the $4.99 a month membership. Carrie, how are you doing?
Oh, I've been better and I've been worse. So really excited about this conversation here today. Yeah. We don't want balance in the Force because the Sith aren't good guys. So I would prefer not balanced, but it's going to happen from time to time. And yeah, so prayers would be much appreciated for me right now.
Fair enough. Lord have mercy. Now it's good to have you, Carrie. Me and you haven't did an episode together in a minute, other than the live stream, or the giveaway. So I'm looking forward to this because you're here too. So thank you, Courtney. Late, the person who was late to the show. Horrible.
Late, but came in during the intro, so slid right in.
You got it. So how you doing?
I'm doing well overall, but lots of bad health news family-wise this week, so you guys can keep, especially my husband's family, in your prayers.
Okay.
So yeah.
Lord have mercy.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. All right, y'all. Well, you know what? I don't think we need a lot of banter. We got a good little chunk to go through here looking at the outline. So I am going to kick it on over to whoever wants it. And let's jump into this. So first, before we do that, real quick, let's kind of rephrase. How would each of you, if you could, maybe simplify or rephrase Troy's question for some people that might not understand exactly what in the world it was I even said to begin with. So how would you guys rephrase his question? Courtney, go ahead, and then we'll just go Amber and then Carrie if you wanted.
Oh, I was going to say start with Amber because she's the one who worked
Amber,
hard on this outline.
You're up, Amber. Go ahead.
Okay, so I think I would rephrase or simplify this question to mean, can the pagan gods claim sacred space? And can Yahweh take that sacred space away from them? I think is the question that we really looked into.
Okay. All right. Carrie.
So I am going to kind of put some burrs in the conversation today, not because I'm going to disagree with anybody, but because I think that there is a tendency and a danger that we as Christians can look at the Bible and look at ancient texts and other beliefs, and we put this really strong dividing line between those two. Right? Like all of the pagans were this and all of the Israelites were this. And clearly that's not what we see in the Bible. And it's not what personally, it's not what I think God interacts with people like that in history either. I think he interacts with people in a more personal way a lot of times. And so I kind of want to push back on some things just to get the best thinking that we can have on this. And just try to make sure we're not overstating our case and not looking at the other side and other potentialities. So for that being said, I think that in the concept of sacred space, there's a really definitive way that we're going to be talking about that and that Amber's going to be bringing out here that is what we call the biblical proper way to look at it, right? So the Bible forms like a polemic against pagan nations and against pagan ideas. And so we're going to be presenting the biblical perspective of that. But then there's kind of this way that you can also look at it and say, well, the average pagan who is genuinely trying to worship God and trying to live their life in the best way can kind of have this different way of looking at it. And so that's just kind of what my perspective is going to be. I'm going to be bringing up a few questions and a few things for discussion just to make sure that we can not overstate what we're saying, but show it by scripture and by the reality of what God does in history and like who God is and his character, if that kind of makes sense.
Yeah, perfect. No, that's really good. Courtney, anything to add?
Yeah, I think like Carrie was saying, sometimes we can be like, oh, the pagans were like this and ancient Israel was like this. And now the church is like some completely third thing compared to all of that. Whereas like, God is working with people. Like there are some things that are true about the way that people from other religions view things like sacred space or the way that God interacts with people in very similar ways, which is why you kind of have like ziggurats all over the world or things like this. Like they're all trying to work towards this holy mountain idea. And so there are some commonalities there. But I think what I'm going to be bringing to this conversation is just some interesting tidbits. I mean, Amber's done a lot of the heavy lifting on the Hebrew side of things and ancient Near Eastern backgrounds. So I'm going to be just working from kind of tying some of that in the book of Exodus as we were building that tabernacle out and how also that translates to the temple. So I'll be more focused on that in this conversation. And hopefully we'll have something interesting to say that people will like at some point.
Oh, yeah.
So, but Amber will know a little bit more about what the other nations are doing. And I'll know a little bit, probably, maybe more, maybe not about what Israel is doing specifically.
All right. Right on. Appreciate that. Okay. So let's get into definitions then. Sacred space. We're defining sacredness, holiness, whatever, however we want to define sacred. And then I think we know what a space is, but I'll let y'all define sacred space.
All right. So first we're going to start with a definition of sacred, which I pulled out of the International Standard Bible Encyclopedia for anyone who's interested. And it defines, I wish I can't really share this on my screen. It doesn't work very well, but It says a special status pertaining to certain objects, persons, and events that stand in exclusive relationship to God because of their use in religious ceremonies. And the Revised Standard Version, both holy and sacred, render the Hebrew word Kadesh, sacred. Oh, I didn't say that right. Hang on. Sorry. I mispronounced that. Okay.
Kadosh. Kadosh.
Kadosh. There you go. Thank you. It's English, and I don't do it very well in English. I'd rather look at the Hebrew. So
Yeah.
I didn't fix it first. Anyway, sacred is used only to describe persons or things that have been made holy. The character of God is always described as holy, and a sacred object is the one separated from common use by cultic sanctions. Thus, the sacred anointing oil used in the temple was to be made to Yahweh's explicit instructions. It was not to be used for other purposes by ordinary lay persons. So it is definitely a sacred is a pulling out and making exclusive for the use in the Bible of the things of Yahweh, but in these other religions around. And we're focusing on Mesopotamia because it is the most similar. There are similarities in like Egypt and some of these other nations, but we definitely wanted to focus. I've definitely focused on Mesopotamia because we interact with it so much in the rest of the Bible and the Old Testament and the prophets, and it's a system that there's a lot of overlap and similarities too. So it really is fun to kind of flesh out and look at the similarities and the differences. So, and then to define sacred space, I pulled out, let me find, this is a very long quote. I won't read the whole thing, but I got this out of a book called, oh no, wait, that's not that one. It's from the Dictionary of Biblical Imagery by IVP, and this entry is by Leland Rankin and Jim Wilholt and Tremper Longman, Cole Duras, and et al. There's a few more involved here, so we won't read the whole thing because it's really long. But sacred space is a sense of place, runs throughout the Bible. Sacred space is a place where God is encountered in a special or direct way, by virtue of which is the very place becomes holy and set apart from original space. It is the point of reference to which people return, especially or either physically or in memory. Some sacred spaces are the site of once only encounters with God, while others are places of perpetual visitation. So that is, we'll just keep it short with that, because that is a definition, I think, of a good definition of sacred space to start with. And then, where did it go? One more really quick. There it is. So there's a book, a really interesting book called Bound for the Promised Land, the Land of Promise and God's Redemptive Plan. An article, that was the name of the article, by Orrin Martin. It's in New Studies Biblical Theology it's printed out by IVP, edited by D.A. Carson et al. That was volume 34. Anyway, it brought, I thought this was really interesting too. It talked about creation and the place for king and kingdom. The third facet of the kingdom, I can't say that word, triptych, is God's place, which is a garden planted by the Lord God. Within this sacred space, Adam and Eve are to be fruitful and multiply, subdue, and have dominion over the earth and enjoy God's blessing. This serves as an ideal place for humanity to dwell with and under the Lord God in his vice regents over creation. It is here in the garden where the themes of kingdom and place are closely entwined. In order for the king to have dominion, he must have a domain. This domain is Eden. This sacred space is the archetypal place where God dwells with his people, and through the proliferation of key priest kings, God's glorious presence and rule will expand across the earth. So, and there's a bunch more there, but we'll just kind of leave it at that to kind of give us a starting place for our sacred spaces that can be physical, or they can be encounters, dreams, visions, or memories of interaction with the divine. So they aren't always have to be anchored to a physical place. But as we'll get to in a minute, a lot of the times we're claiming sacred space is building some sort of object building memorial on those places and declaring them sacred because they are manifestations of interacting with the divine. So, does anybody have any? They want to add to those definitions?
Yeah, just a question to see how you would parse this. What about like the people themselves? Like, as I'm thinking as far as disease in particular, like, because disease as being caused by a deity, if it's being caused by this deity, whatever, right? So how does that fit into, or does it fit into the concept of sacred space, is in what you're defining it as, I guess.
Right. So that would limit someone's access until they go through a purification ritual, and then they would be welcomed back into that sacred space. So, that
would be in relation to the space and not, I don't even know what I want to would even put it like that. But when you were talking about dreams and how you could interact with the divine in that kind of a space, like, would disease be in that kind of a similarity, I guess?
But that could be a really complicated question, depending on if visions, dreams, and memories are actual physical interactions with the divine. So if it is, like we see Isaiah get cleansed in Isaiah 6, he gets cleansed by the coal with the angel. So whatever infirmities or impurities he would come in with are erased. So at least, and I would say in the Bible and in interacting with Yahweh, God can declare holy that which he wants to declare holy whenever he wants to. So I don't see it as much of a problem.
We might come back to this point later in the conversation.
Right. So yeah, but basically I think it would be more of a problem in other religions that don't have the same concept of being able to declare holy without the ritual process that we see in the Old Testament.
Okay, well, I might have something to bring up that will be fun to talk about if we get to that point. So
okay,
hey,
all right. So
hey, Amber, just real quick, I don't mean to interrupt, and I apologize if you went over this while I was gone for just a second. So in writing my paper, I'm just curious what you guys think about this, but in writing my paper on Romans 9, in studying Chrysostom about this, he says, so let me just read a quick little passage from this guy. And you all tell me what you think about it. So he's using the word anathema here, and we all know what that means, right? But he's talking about Romans 9:2, where Paul says, "Let me be accursed or anathema for my brothers and my kinsmen." So Chrysostom writes this. He writes, quote, "What then is the curse? Hear his own words. If any man love not our Lord Jesus Christ, let him be accursed." Anathema, 1 Corinthians 16:22. That is, let him be set apart from all, removed from all. For as in the case of a thing dedicated, and the Greek word here is anathema, so A-N-A-T-H long E. That's the only difference between anathema and anathema, is that E is elongated or it's not. Or in other words, in Greek, it's either an eta or it is an epsilon. So not much spelling difference, but he continues, he says, for as in the case of a thing dedicated, anathema, which is set apart for God, no one would venture so much as to touch it with his hand or even to come near it. So too with a man who is put apart from the church, in cutting him off from all and removing him as far off as possible, he calls him by this name anathema, in a contrary sense, thus with much fear denouncing to all men to keep apart from him. So just out of curiosity, have you all ever heard of this concept? So I know we're getting into Greek a little bit, and Amber, that's not your wheelhouse. I apologize, but I'm just curious if you guys have came across this before, that since we're talking about sacred space and things set apart to God as holy, if they've ever been described or you've ever heard them described as anathema, and then in correlation with anathema meaning set apart or cut off from Christ. What are your thoughts about that, just out of curiosity?
I would say that I think the idea is reflected, but I don't know. I would have to go research a direct word correlation. Courtney, this would be more your area.
Yeah, I would have to research a direct word correlation too, but I'm sure there is some kind of concept of like being cut off, because there is like a desacralization of both space and people, where you kind of corrupt a place, or the furniture of the tabernacle gets corrupted whenever it goes to Babylon and no longer is used for that purpose, for the sake of being used in holy space and things like that. So I wonder if anathema would correspond to that.
Well, there is also the setting out of things which are tainted, or so that they can be cleansed and be brought back in idea. So I'm not sure if that is an exact correlation, but there is, for the protection of the community, that which has been tainted or diseased is set aside to be cured, purified, and brought back in. It's usually not the intention to cast it out permanently. It's usually always with the idea of restoration to bring back in, but sometimes that's not always possible through various reasons. But
right.
Yeah,
I got you. Here, just to add to that, I'm looking up in the Lunita lexicon, and it says anathema is that which is dedicated exclusively to the service of a deity, an offering. And so they quote Luke 21:5, and it says, quote, when some remarked about the temple, how beautiful it is with its stones and offerings, literally that it was adorned with beautiful stones and offerings. And I guess the offerings there is anathema. So it sounds like something like, right, kind of like the Eucharist, in the sense of whenever, in the Orthodox view anyway, is like whenever we take the bread and the wine and offer it up to God, and then he changes that into the body and blood of Christ, like that, what's being offered is anathema, and not necessarily like all of sacred space. But it sounds like what you guys are saying is that the sacred space itself, if anathema is a right word, which I think it is, it's set apart to God. That's kind of what we're talking about, and what makes this space sacred, because it's used for the service of God in one way or another. Is that right?
Right.
Awesome.
Yeah. Oh, I have just a quick aside about like this word kadosh in the Hebrew Bible, if we want to get into that right now.
Thank you.
Amber, I don't know. Do you want to?
Go ahead.
The difference between holy and sacred and profane and what would be like regular, like non-holy. Okay, I'm going to share my screen, and you guys, if y'all want to fix how this actually presents like with our faces, then go for it. Or I'm going to try to share my screen. It's like I don't see it. Oh, there we go. All right, here we go. I'm learning how it works on StreamYard over here, you guys.
You're good.
So most of the time when we think of holy and sacred or profane and regular, we think once something becomes holy, then it is now pure and clean. And if it's profane or regular, and the word profane often gets used in your Bible translations, but by that, I just mean something regular that is not dedicated to the temple or not dedicated to sacred space. And so we think, oh, that's impure and unclean, right? And once something that is profane, like let's just say I have a bowl that I'm going to dedicate to the temple to be used on the altar or something. Once it is dedicated to the temple and becomes holy, it cannot go back to being a regular bowl anymore. Like I can't go and take that back to my house and use it anymore. But really in the Hebrew Bible, when things become holy or sacred, they can be either in a state of purity, meaning that they are fit for sacred space and they are clean and ready to be used there, or impurity. So holy things can be in a state of purity or impurity, and therefore profane things like, my house, like as an Israelite, my house can be in a state of purity or impurity, but my house is not God's house, right? But if my house is in a state of impurity, the priest needs to come and look at it and do a ritual and cleanse it and hope that the mold goes away, right? So I just want to show you, like, when it comes to space, we can have regular space that is profane space, like my house in ancient Israel, that is either pure or impure. And we can also have God's house that is either pure or impure. So then you have rituals that will bring it back to a state of ritual purity, which is largely what Leviticus is talking about how to do, to bring things back into a state of holiness once those holy objects have been dedicated for that purpose of sacred space. So that's just kind of a quick rundown of those words. Y'all got any thoughts or questions about that?
I'm wondering about regular, if common might be a good word there. Yeah.
We can change it to common.
Nice chart.
Yeah, I like that
I
too.
like it.
So if nobody else is going to do it, are like things like the Eucharist and the showbread. Let's go back to the Old Testament. The showbread, the candles, everything like that that's offered to God. Would that be kind of like a fractal of the temple itself? What do y'all think about that?
I think it's absolutely, I would say yes.
Ooh,
Yeah.
Fractal patterns, fractal patterns everywhere.
Absolutely.
There we go.
Yes,
Fractal patterns
is
everywhere.
a fractal.
This is a fractal.
Absolutely. Okay. So now we're going to
I have more fractal to come later on when we start
This
talking
could be
about
on the test later.
Yeah.
Right.
Keep it in mind. Right, take your notes.
All right. So we're gonna dive into a little bit the rituals, and then we're gonna jump back a little bit to the sacred spaces itself. So I want to kind of we're gonna go back a little bit backwards order, but there's a reason for that. So so we're gonna start with I wish I would have had time to make like cool like slides and stuff. I just didn't. So focusing again, we're going to focus on Mesopotamian rituals here, and I want to also put a great big statement on everything else afterwards that says we are talking about the thing that is defined as if it were to happen perfectly as laid out in their religious practice. In a practical application, it rarely goes this way. So it goes off. I mean, we'll see in Exodus, they don't even get 5 minutes and the whole thing goes off the rails. Okay. So the ideal that is given and the actual practical application rarely overlap completely. So right now we're talking about the ideal, the standard that was set. And then later we'll talk about how that goes wrong. So with that in mind, what we're dealing with here is the timeline of Mesopotamian civilization starting around 3500 BCE, which is the Sumerians, and then about 2300 BC, we transfer over to the Akkadians, and then this is where it gets a little squishy because the timelines overlap a lot because you got pocket nations that are fighting with each other, and it's really kind of hard to pin some of this down. So you got the Assyrians who are running around 2500 to about 605 BC. The Akkadians are the short-lived group from about 2300 to about 2100 BC. And then you got the Babylonians that come on at about 1900 BC to about 539 BC. And Babylon comes and goes, and Assyria comes and goes, and they rise in power and they fall in power. And so it's not like a hard start and a hard stop on those dates. So it's difficult to pin down because there's a lot of mass chaos during this period of time in Mesopotamia. But that's basically who we're working with. But the Sumerians developed early writing, and a lot of the religious practices that we see echoed in the rest of these Mesopotamian civilizations kind of started in Sumeria. The Akkadians, who were influenced by the Sumerian rituals, expanded their significance and their influence throughout the region. So that kind of amplified the carrying over of the Sumerian practices. The Assyrians were known for their military prowess. These guys, for a long time, were the big mean dogs on the block, and they were known for being cruel. And we see that a lot in the prophets, a lot of talk about the Assyrians and all of that. But they, through sheer force, spread their religious rituals and legitimized their rule and their enforcement of their rituals through sheer military power. It pretty much. And then the Babylonians come along and they kind of integrated and adapted from those other three to pull their system. They're in the late Babylonian period from the 1900 to about 540 BC. So they kind of pull the parts that they liked And they really brought out the emphasis of the role as king as the intermediary between the gods and the people, lessening the influence of the priests and increasing the influence of the monarch. So that's Babylon is where that comes in. And Carrie, do you have anything you want to add to that? Because I know this is a lot more, you're a lot more intricately involved in that than I am. So
yeah, it's a problem to even get that overview, because
right.
like you said, they come in and out, and it's like, who's this group and who's that group? And then also you have to ask yourself the question of how are these people even related? Are they even related? And that's a question most people don't ask. So it's a mess, but the context of Mesopotamia is very, very prominent in, and it's not to say that you can't pull in Egypt and all of the other things, but it's probably the biggest, because you see Babylon. I mean, you see Egypt compared to Babylon, and there's always similarities. And there might be some things I'll pull in from Egypt, but most of the conversation can really revolve around those cultures because of the impact it's had, especially in the Torah and with the prophets and all of that.
Well, and I think as far as Old Testament imagery goes, if we step back and just look at the Old Testament imagery, Egypt starts as the big dog on the block, and then Assyria kind of is coming up and takes over as the big dog as Egypt is declining. And then Babylon overthrows Assyria as the big dog. But that is a fractal pattern that just showing dominance by pagan nations throughout. So there you go. That's kind of how that works in the Old Testament, the way they look at that. They're all representative of a pattern of the same thing, of who is the dominant.
The other hard thing about this kind of a conversation is that you do have distinctive differences, and even within the same culture. So you have to, and like I said, when we can't overstate the case. Just because there is a similarity over here and a similarity over there, you have to, in order to fully integrate that similarity and connect it to the Bible, there has to be some reason for it connecting in time as well as in space. You can't just whitewash the whole thing and say it all matters, right? And so, yeah, that's the hard thing about it. But that's why you go into the specific actual rituals to see how those line up in time and space with Scripture.
Great. And this is going to get even more complicated when we start getting into rituals. And you see this conversation that also echoes the one that happens with when you start talking about Torah and the Levitical system. And a lot of people start screaming about they stole from Hammurabi's code, and they stole from Egypt, and they stole from. So like you're going to have a situation where in this part of the world, like this is the known world at the time. And in their setting there, they are nomadic, they're semi-nomadic, agrarian. And what you have there is your entire universe. And so a problem of somebody stealing your livelihood by stealing your ox is going to be the same problem in Egypt and Mesopotamia and in Israel. It's all the same thing. You're taking away someone's ability to survive. But the difference isn't so much we're stealing everybody's, one culture is stealing the law and copy it from another. It's they're comparing male, first of all, is they're corresponding internationally here. And there is some of that, but there's also an ox stolen in Egypt. How does an Egyptian, religious context deal with that same problem as a Mesopotamian religious context and a Hebrew religious context dealing with the same problem with their own deities and their own religious systems? And it's the same thing for the sacred and the rituals. We've all got to honor our deities. So we've all got to have the things that we do to honor those deities, the implements, the pieces, all of the accoutrement that goes along with honoring your deities and doing these rituals. They're going to look very similar because we're working with the same materials in the same region and a lot of the same common mindset that's going to interact with their deities in similar ways, because they don't separate out the way that we do our everyday life and our spiritual religious life. To them, that is the same thing. And I don't think they would understand the question in the first place, because to them, their spiritual life is their life. They are much better at praxis than we can ever, I think, comprehend, because to them, it is not the same thing. So,
right. Well, and to kind of piggyback on that, another related topic is that for Israel, holiness became an ethical concern on some level. And we can't say necessarily the same for other religions. It's
right.
Possibly, but for the Bible, as especially a polemic book, it really hammers home these ethics and connection with wisdom literature and things like that, that don't always or necessarily show up in other cultures. And maybe they do, and they're just short-lived and we don't have enough information, kind of a thing. Again, don't overstate it, but I think it's pretty clear that there is a distinction there.
Right. So we just want to kind of put that out there, though, to say it's going to look similar. And that's kind of why they look similar together, because they're in the same place, dealing with the same problems, the same worship, but in different deities in different contexts. So,
yeah, I just watched Billy Carson, and he told me something completely different, like that the Jews stole this stuff because there's similarities between, the different stories and things like that. And I just think y'all are wrong, because Billy Carson's right. I'm just going to say that. So y'all want to refute Billy Carson, or nah?
No.
Courtney, you're
really.
muted. I know it. You'll get there. It's all good.
I know.
Good.
I've been so good up until this point. Yeah, I think that just to piggyback on what Carrie said too, like that, well, scholars, you'll often see them say like ritual impurity versus moral impurity, or ritual purity and moral purity. And they do say that that is just a distinction that they're trying to make between like keeping what we would call morality and keeping ritual purity, so that we can distinguish between, like the rituals that might be performed if you've had menstruation or touched a corpse, versus like if you've actually like wronged someone, and those distinctions. However, in Israel, like that overlap really is just so tightly bound that eventually the moral impurity gets so great that God leaves, right? And so it affects the ritual impurity in some way, and which we just don't have evidence for being so tightly overlapped in other societies. But in terms of Billy Carson, I think that this is that kind of distinction between, for those who are really like in the fine-grained details, between John Walton and Michael Heiser, is like John Walton would say that this kind of borrowing is happening because it's a polemic, it's in their worldview, that the Bible was written for us, but not to us. And he would say maybe that's just an accommodation by God, and these things are just being used and borrowed so that God can make the point that he needs to make to his people at his time. But then in Michael Heiser, like Michael Heiser actually believes this is the true nature of the unseen realm, and that there is some truth there that God is communicating about how, like, what the way that the temple is built actually reflects something about the true nature of the cosmos and things like that. So there is some debate as to like how much this actually reflects the true reality of the cosmos, versus is it just an accommodation because God is trying to reach into this people and communicate to this people who are socially located amongst the other nations. But either way, Billy Carson, like, God's got to communicate to people who exist at a particular time and place. And so it's not just totally borrowing and copying and stealing. It is actually communication and revelation, and what I would call theophany, like God appearing to his people and revealing things to them.
Courtney, if Billy don't sue us, like I will definitely put you up against a debate against him in a debate any day. Billy, just reach out to me and let me know. No, but I agree. So enough being funny. Like I absolutely 100% agree with you guys, right? So for a New Testament context, think the word homoousios, right? Means the same nature, right? And so we got that term, like Christians actually took that term from paganism. Now, whenever they apply that to God, does that mean that we're saying that God is the exact same as these other people who worshipped and called God homoousios, or of one nature, or of one substance, right? No, This is a word that we use, Christians. I mean, look at the Gen Z Bible. For if y'all want some stealing and borrowing, think of that, right? The Gen Z Bible uses phrases that are more apt to hook Gen Z people than it is like boomers or millennials or, you know, whatever, right? So just because you use a phrase that somebody else has used or a word somebody else has used, it doesn't mean you stole that concept per se. Words are universal, and we're allowed to use words to define our meanings, right? And to define other words. And so I don't know who started that. I don't know if it was Billy or if it was somebody else. I'm sure people have been doing it a long time before Billy. But just because you borrow, or even a concept, right? It doesn't mean, say for example, the Enuma Elish and Genesis said the exact same creation story. Wonderful. Like that's multiple evidence that it happened that way, right? But it doesn't mean that Jews stole that from the ancient Mesopotamians. What it means is there is some truth within other religions. Like, let's just go ahead and say it. Islam and other pagan, I know Islam is Abrahamic and not necessarily pagan in that sense, but you know what I mean. But the point is, you take Abrahamic faiths like Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, and you take other pagan like Norse myths and things like crazy stuff like that, right? Like there's elements of truth in those things, and it's not crazy to think that maybe they articulated some of that truth. All right, wonderful. If it's true and the scriptures proclaim to be the word of God, they're going to articulate everything that's true to they're going to articulate everything that's true that they wanted to in the scriptures is what I mean. Not the Bible doesn't say everything that's true. That's not what I mean. But if there's concepts that are the same in different religions, have we ever stopped to think maybe that religion got it right? I don't know. There's a whole lot of cultures that talk about a flood myth, right?
Yep.
Maybe they just got that right and we didn't steal it. I'm just saying, like,
right.
That's two different ways you can look at it.
Right. Okay. So I'm going to swing us back around.
I'm glad I got the agreement of y'all. Like,
yeah.
Right.
I win.
I think Billy Carson is not alone in that. You know, people have been saying like Christians stole Christmas from a pagan holiday or whatever for a long time. You know, that's just part of the way that people try to take down Christianity in many ways. So, yeah.
Zeitgeist was debunked long ago. If y'all are interested, just check out the Billy Carson and Wes Huff debate. I know everybody's talking about it. It's a wonderful thing. Good job, Wes. We love you. Appreciate you finally taking him down and getting on Joe Rogan. That was great. But if anybody like hasn't ever heard of Zeitgeist, like I suggest you go look it up and watch it. It's free on YouTube, but just be very careful because they make some audacious claims. But if you want to see a Christian actually refute that kind of stuff in debate, go watch the Billy Carson Wes Huff debate. You can find it. A lot of people re-uploaded that thing. So anyway,
all right.
Go ahead.
So swinging back around to jump into rituals here.
Sorry,
so
I didn't mean to sidetrack.
That's okay.
Okay.
You did.
Real quick, Amber, did we define what makes this space sacred?
We're going to get to that in a minute.
Is that later on?
It jumped into, but it's part of the rituals too. Okay. So, and it's coming after we did rituals. Then we're going to dive deep into sacred space. But I think to understand the rituals is going to help us understand how sacred space is claimed. So we're doing the rituals first, and then we'll get into the sacred space. So, all right. So religious rituals were central in Mesopotamian life, and this is not an exhaustive list, but that would include things like 1, offerings. Food, drink, and valuable objects were presented to deities to gain favor. And 2, prayers, communicative acts towards gods, often performed by priests. 3, animal sacrifices. Animals were sacrificed to appease gods and ensure prosperity. Seasonal festivals, celebrations marking the planting and harvest seasons. Harvest ceremonies were rituals to thank the gods for bounty and to pray for future fertility of both land and people and animals. So that was included, the fertility of everything in the culture. Birth rituals were ceremonies to ensure the health of a newborn and bless the family. Marriage rituals were events that joined families and included various rites to invoke divine blessings. And funerary practices were elaborate rituals to honor the dead and ensure safe passage to the afterlife. So that's the basic categories that were prevalent in Mesopotamian life. And there's, again, a lot of correlation between Leviticus, which unfortunately, I don't think we have time to go into all of them into detail, because that would take us forever and it would be a lot of fun, but we don't have the time right now to get into those in too much more detail. But so common symbols and meanings that were running through these rituals were the symbol of water, which is for purification and fertility. Fire, which represented transformation in the presence of the divine, and animals often used in sacrifices had species-specific meanings associated to different deities. So the animal you sacrificed had a lot to do with the deity that you were trying to gain favor of. So,
or the person's status.
Right, or the person's status. So there's a lot of, I think one of the differences that we see, and we'll get into more of this a little bit later, but I think one of the differences between the systems that is really striking is the fact that these Mesopotamian religions were very much about trying to curry or earn the deity's favor because of the chaotic nature of the way that they lived. So the deity didn't it was more about trying to in some way attract or earn. It was very much retributive or meritorious in a way that the Hebrew system is not. So we have to keep that in mind.
But I will push back on that.
Okay, go for it.
Because I don't think that's always the case. And I think that the polemic nature of the Bible leads us to believe that. And in large part, it is like that. But when you actually start reading the rituals and you compare them to biblical rituals, you compare them to biblical texts, and you go side by side, they can sound like, if you lifted it up and you said it to somebody who wasn't super familiar with the Bible, they would, or who wasn't familiar with everything in the Bible, but who was familiar enough to know everything the Bible says, they wouldn't be able to distinguish the two. It would sound exactly like a biblical text. And so I do think we need to be really careful to not just slap the label of they're all doing it for these bad motives.
Well, I think there's also a difference between maintaining holiness and trying to curry favor for holiness, which I think is the distinction here that can be very hard to articulate without getting into the mechanic nitty-gritties and just, trying to stay in the general.
That could also play into the conversation of ethics. Like, what is the purpose of the ritual and the purpose of holiness, and what is that all about? And there would be a difference, I would say, probably, between the cultic idea that's being presented and the people who are doing it, because you have the power structures in place and they're doing it for a purpose, but that could be very different from the people's intention and what they're doing. And so there could be also that element of, we're going to make it sound really good so that you guys go along with what we're doing.
And there's a difference between a well-meaning worshiper who brings their honest offering to a priest or monarch who is going to take that and use it for their own power dynamic and influence and malintention. So there's a disparity there between the worshiper and those who are acting in the intermediary to the divine. So there's also that piece too. Yeah.
Well, and did we talk about, we didn't talk about theophany in relationship to sacred space yet, but
not yet.
Generally speaking, that was why that they identified certain places as sacred and built altars and temples there, is because they had some kind of an encounter with their deity, whether that's a God of Israel or one of these ancient deities. That's what happened there. And so it was like, we know our God has appeared here before, and his appearance made this place sacred on earth. And so therefore we want to try to maintain that location as a place where we can access this deity, because we don't know if we can access him everywhere else. But this right here has historically been a place of access. So that is why those rituals of holiness, whether they're, no matter what ethical component they had with them attached to them, they were there so that like you could potentially access the deity.
Right. We're coming to that in just a second. We're going to do the roles of deities and the roles of humans, and then we're going to get to
Yahweh's always on my mind. So.
We're coming there. We're coming there, Courtney. We're getting there. We just got a couple more things to plow through really quick, and then we get to jump into the really fun stuff of the sacred spaces. So, in general, and again, Mesopotamia is a big umbrella covering a long period of time, and you've got a lot of deities in different pantheons in competition with each other. So these aren't easy definable like pockets or pantheons or systems, because there's a lot of overlap. There's a lot of fighting between them. It's messy, but we're going to try to oversimplify it just to keep it from getting way too complicated and technical here. So basically what you've got on the table in these conversations is a deity called Marduk, who is the chief god of Babylon, associated with creation, water, and magic. There's Ishtar, the goddess of love, war, and fertility, known for her fierce nature. We got Enlil, the god of wind and storms, also regarded as the king of the gods. And you've got Shamash, the sun god, representing justice and truth. So those are the four, I would say, like, I don't know how you would explain that exactly. The four bigger overall deities, and then you've got a bunch of under ones. And there's layers of ranking of deities in pantheons, and those are the big four, and then you got a bunch of under ones running around, also creating, contributing to the pantheon. Let's put it that way. We don't want to overly negativize anybody, because they did make positive contributions to their religious systems as well. So we're not trying to say that they're necessarily good or bad. This just that was their function in the pantheon. So, and then the deity's role in interacting with humans, in the Mesopotamians viewed their relationship with gods as reciprocal. Again, this is massively oversimplifying this. Okay. It's reciprocal, and they believe that by performing rituals and offerings, they might gain favor and protection from divine forces. So the intention is good, is positive on the part of the worshiper, right? And then this relationship is fostered by a sense of duty to uphold rituals and maintain harmony with the gods. So worshipers are trying to survive and maintain harmony in their religious practices here. And that, I think, is something that we see in the Hebrew system as well, on that intention on the worshiper.
Well, and even in the Bible, we see that reciprocity. I mean, it's there, because how do you have a relationship otherwise?
Right.
And one question also would be the difference between ritual and magic, because magic would be something that would bind the deity to do something in relation to what you did. That's how I would define the difference between ritual and magic, just ritual at large.
Right. Yeah. And I had to leave out, I did a whole hour-and-a-half rabbit hole just on Babylonian magic rituals, and I just didn't have time to pack it in here. So there's a lot of binding language that is going to come in big time in Paul in the New Testament, when we're loose of those bonds. And that's what he's kind of referring to. Hang on, Tyler, because there's a lot of binding aspects to the Mesopotamian system that is not necessarily correlational one-to-one to the Hebrew system, because Yahweh views that differently, but we're freed from the binding idea through Christ in the New Testament. Tyler.
So this is kind of off subject, but not really. Would you guys consider necromancy magic or ritual?
Yes.
Do you
well, it depends. Like,
okay.
It could be either one, because again,
right,
it depends on, is there the presumption that if you do this, then this will happen? And there is that thread in a lot of the literature and things that we see. You do something, you are guaranteed something. If you're not guaranteed, then that, in my definition, how I'm looking at this, that wouldn't be in the realm of magic, because it's the deity still got a will that he's going to either do it or not. Okay, so a good example would be Joseph with the sticks it's not Joseph, it's Jacob with breeding the goats in front of the sticks. That's sympathetic magic, or at least it's a type of sympathetic magic. But in the Bible, because this is Jacob interacting with God, he's not doing it with the presumption that if I do this, then I'm going to make God give me the animals that I want. It's working within the system that he has. This is how we interact with the divine right now. This is how I understand it. This would be in the realm of accommodation, of God accommodating this with him and communicating. If there is a presumption that if I do this, then God is obligated to give me the animals, that's magic. If I'm doing this because I have this relationship with God, he's given me this promise, this is how I'm going to interact and participate to bring about that promise, but it's God who's doing it. It's not me obligating God.
Okay, so I like that. The difference between magic and ritual is binding the deity to do something. That is magic. Okay. So then I love horror movies, right? So I'm thinking of like a couple, a group, a couple, whoever, right? Like some preteens, they get together, they get around a Ouija board, right? And they summon the devil, right? To answer some questions. They're expecting to get a response. They're expecting, what they're doing is actually summoning, spirits or demons or whatever. We can then, because of that expectation, is that binding that entity to do that? Or
a lot of times let's say the movie is a good example, because a lot of times the kids are getting together, they're doing this, and they might have some expectation, but they're not really fully involved and invested in this is going to there might be like a character who's like that, and that's the character who is bringing all of the other kids and convincing them to do it, perhaps. And so that character, let's just keep taking the movie idea. So that character in the movie would be the character who has invested a relationship with the evil entity or whatever. They're the one who has built up this idea of reciprocity, of tit for tat with the evil entity. So from that kid's perspective, it would be a type of magic. But in the story, is the deity actually is bound to do this? Is that the type of relationship they have or not? Is the relationship actually tit for tat, or does the kid just kind of think it is and hope it is? And so there could be the difference between magic actually working and magic just trying to do magic, and I don't know if it's going to work, kind of a thing. And that does kind of cross some boundaries with ritual, but there's a motivation and a presumption that there's rules behind it, that the entity is bound, that he's playing within, whereas it's God's rules in the Bible, and he gets to set them, and humans are nowhere near setting any rules. It's God who's doing it all. And that's why we see all of the every time that God does a covenant, it's God doing it. It's not really that two-sided thing. Like, humans are involved and they're expected to respond and have the relationship, but humans aren't going to be the ones who are going to make anything happen. So ritual is it's like the humans and the deity are both doing things to make it happen.
Gotcha. Because what I was thinking is kind of like what Troy said here. So would Solomon's demand on Yahweh to answer whenever someone prays to the temple, to answer whatever they ask, to which God does not agree to, is that considered an attempt at magic?
So I think we do have instances in the Bible where people are trying to perform magic.
Yeah.
That's why they get in trouble, because they are acting like pagans.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, the king, Saul, whenever he goes to the witch of Endor and he tries to summon the demon or summon Saul or
summon Samuel.
Samuel.
Yep.
Thank you.
Samuel.
Is that then magic? Because I guess what I'm just trying to do is maybe nuance it a little bit more.
So in that, it wouldn't be, because God is taking the active role in it. Saul has done all of these things, trying to get God trying to force God. And so he is in that the zone of trying to perform magic in order to get his own will, in order to force God to give me this because I say so. And it's several times that he does things and it doesn't work, and it finally works. And the reason we can know it's Samuel and not a demon is because what he says is accurate, what he says comes to pass, what he says is in line with God's will.
I love you guys so much. I really do, because this brings a whole new perspective on the idea of works-based salvation. And if we do works, God owes us salvation. That's almost like saying works is magic to get God obliged to do something for us. And nobody, like no Eastern Orthodox Christian I know says that. No Roman Catholic today anyway says that. No Protestant says that, right? And so whenever you sorry, I'm kind of all over the place here, but at the same time, I think it's relevant to what we're talking about, is that, if you are saying, well, that we or another group is saying, well, yeah, we do works and we earn salvation. Well, then you're putting works in the realm of magic. Am I hearing you right, Carrie?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
And growing up LDS, that's kind of where I was for a while growing up. Yeah.
And that's exactly why. So now spin that. That's exactly why something like the Eucharist or baptism is not magic, right?
Right.
This is God. Go ahead. Finish my thought.
Oh, I was about to go there. That's like what people say about the Eucharist all the time. If they have a symbolic view of the Eucharist, is like, this is not magic. I promise, this is not magic. As if what they think of as a Catholic view of transubstantiation is a form of magic, where we're taking this one thing and changing it out, and it's becoming a completely different thing. But God has obligated himself to that.
Right.
Which, as we'll see when we go through these sacred space passages, God obligates himself to these places. I will be your God and you will be my people. And whenever you come here, this is the place that I have caused my name to dwell. Right. And so God is the one who sanctifies this, blesses it, and designates it for this purpose. And you still have to attach your heart by faith to this, because we see whenever it does become transactional in the prophets don't critique the ritual itself. They critique the heart of the worshipers behind the ritual for treating it as if it is transactional.
So God has bound himself, but he hasn't bound himself to each and every single individual who wants to claim that right. Because it's not a right. It's something beyond what that is. He's promised this and he's bound himself to it, but it's not this individual. Everyone gets to go and draw their ticket and make this claim.
It comes down to God can obligate himself, but man cannot obligate God. And every time man tries, it goes very, very badly. So it comes down to who can obligate the deity.
I'm glad y'all said that, because that's exactly why I put Troy, like I've had Troy's comment up for so long now, is he says, I fasted and I pray, why isn't God not giving me what I want? Which I've had that idea, like I prayed God that you would send me visions because I want to see a vision, right? But I never get it, right? I never had it. Well, why is that? Because it's not magic. Super simple answer. Okay. Yeah.
We cannot obligate God to respond. God can obligate himself to respond, but we cannot initiate that obligation.
Yeah.
Can we initiate covenant? God initiates covenant. We do not. So Yep.
I don't know. I'm assuming Carrie because of her cheeky smile. But did you put this on here? A stream of people who wear glasses? No, it wasn't you. Who was it?
Wasn't
Who
me.
threw this up here?
Wasn't me.
I bet somebody's watching. That's probably Josh or Davidson. But I never noticed we all had glasses on.
I can take mine off. I don't need. I only use mine to for watching
Courtney,
TV. Basically, I'm close enough.
No, don't be a heretic. Put them back on.
Nope, that's Josh. Look at he's busted down there.
He use them for driving and watching TV.
Got him.
But to
Okay.
also back around just quickly to Troy's comment about like Solomon demanding
yes,
that like God answer the prayer of people whenever they face there. To me, like just going back and looking at this, like the language actually here, it seems more like a petitionary request, especially whenever you look at it in the Hebrew. It has this little indicator where it's like, please hear their prayer. Like he is showing some deference there. So please hear, you could almost read that as please hear the supplications of your servant, of your people Israel, when they pray towards this place. Please hear from heaven, your dwelling place, and when you hear, forgive. So it isn't quite making a demand. It is like what we would normally ask of a request for God and how we would phrase that. Right. So I don't think Solomon is quite doing the magic thing with the dedication prayer of the temple.
Cosmic septic. Works lock for sure. Go ahead.
All right, so are we ready to transition into the sacred spaces now? I think. All right, so the significance of sacred spaces. So the significance of the rituals in the religion cannot be overstated because of the significance of sacred spaces. Sacred spaces, particularly temples, were focal points for rituals, because the structures were designed to be earthly homes of the gods, reflected in their power and majesty, but they were not exclusionary to temples. These sacred spaces served as vital links between humans and the divine, shaping social structures, cultural identities, and common bonds. And they're also the legacy of ancient practices that continue to resonate in contemporary spirituality, and inviting further exploration of all of this Old Testament, ancient Near East, because it does echo resonantly with us, because sacred spaces are places where, let me go back up to the definition of sacred, that it is the places where we encounter the divine. So sometimes it is a physical place where, like, God meets Abraham, or God wrestles with Jacob, or people will encounter, or in dreams where they meet divines, or they meet angelic beings, or you see Christophanies or theophanies, or whichever word you want to use there, depending on your tradition, right? So anywhere that God and a deity is encountered becomes a sacred space, and those are commemorated and become a focal point of worship because a divine has been encountered there. So those become spaces where they continue to return to have repeat encounters with the divine. So a sacred space can be anywhere there is a divine encounter and a place to return to continue to have those divine encounters and continue to commune with the divine, because a divine presence has been experienced in that space. Okay, does that make sense? Anybody have any addendums or changes to that? Or are we good?
Good.
Okay. All right. So let me scroll back down, because I had to go back up to look at my definition again. So reclaiming sacred space. So when a sacred space is either claimed or reclaimed, because there's not a lot of difference. There's a little bit of difference and some nuance to whether it's freshly claimed space or reclaimed space, but those are, digging into the weeds. So I'm just going to lump them together here just because of the overview that we're doing and how that works. So that was done in several different ways. So there would be some sort of something constructed. So there would be, like we see pre-tabernacle, you see a lot of altars being built, or those stacking of stones. That is a marker that is a sacred space, because there's been a divine encounter in that place. And every time you go by, anyone who is familiar with that that culture and those people are going to know that that's what that is, and they probably will know the story of that particular stack. What is the word I'm looking for? It's escaping me. I don't know. Anyway, that can also be temples that are built there. It can be high places. It can be spaces of worship that are like synagogue type ideas. It can be in proximity to the main sacred space, which is always the temple type object, like the ziggurat or the temple, or the thing that is the anchor to the center of the deity's power. But those sacred spaces can pop up anywhere, whether it's physical or in dreams or in memories or visions. It can happen at any spot. But if it's a physical location, some sort of artifact or building will be erected in those places. And then in those spaces, they will have rituals and festivals that we just talked about conducted in those spaces for the community to interact with the divine and do all of those things that those rituals were designed to do, to let them continue to interact with the divine in those spaces. And then a lot of times in those things that were constructed, especially if it's buildings or sacred structures like temples, that they were designed also to reflect their view of cosmic order, their view of what those divine encounters would look like. There's a lot of separating of space from the places where the divine was, where the people could go, the levels of access that people had. Those are built into those sacred spaces through that symbolic architecture. And then there's always usually some sort of water element. So you'll see them built by flowing water. You'll see them bring in things that are big tanks or basins. Like there's water, because life is water is life. In this region where you got a lot of drought. You're very dependent on the cycles and the seasons. So water is so important. So there will always be some sort of container or pool or spring or river or, with water in it. So that and the performing of those rituals to cleanse those sacred spaces is, we'll get into that in a second. But so that's how you recognize where a sacred space is because something will be constructed to mark this is a sacred space. And then the degree of sacredness, I think, is going to determine how big and how grand that is. Like when the center home of the deity is going to be where you're going to build your temple, your ziggurat, your whatever the main center of worship is. And then you'll have in the other places where deities are encountered, you'll see smaller things like synagogues or high places or
it's also a function of civilization and centralization, because throughout the Old Testament, we have high places all over, and so it's, to the point that you have people who say, oh, no worship of Yahweh was centralized until Josiah. And you'll have claims like that, because it's just so common. And, that just shows the presumption behind the claim, because obviously there has been centralization for quite some time. Like, it's not Josiah who just suddenly decides that there is a main spot, right? But yeah, and so you're going to have availability, and just the reason you see the stacks of stones or the unhewn stones is the level of involvement of humans with the sacred building is different at different times, and that has meaning behind not hewing the stones kind of a thing as well. Like that is the deity involving itself. And in fact, in most places, we see it in Egypt, we see it in Mesopotamia, we see it a lot of places, that it's the God who is designating the holy space, and who even we see deities in Egypt designing the sacred space, the temples, just like what we see with the tabernacle and the temple.
Mm-hmm. And even if like people want to claim centralization was late, we already have early on in the Hebrew Bible multiple sacred spaces by which people go and access Yahweh, because that's where God has appeared. So Jacob builds two. He builds Bethel, and then he also builds one in Shechem after the wrestler incident. And then Abraham has one in Mamre, and then we see David's son to go offer a sacrifice down there. Like, even though David has already brought the tabernacle back to Jerusalem, he still wants to go and offer a sacrifice down there, because God appeared to Abraham there way back when. Because if God has appeared there at some point in time, and this goes for the God of Israel or other gods as well, if they've appeared there at some point in time, that remains a sacred space by which people can go and access the deity.
All right, I have a question.
Okay.
Sorry, Amber, do you want to comment on
Well, I was just going to say, we see this pattern continue through the New Testament, through the history of the church, where they will go in and they will start to serve the community, and the church is planted and the community grows up around it, because the centrality of the function of that space. So they are, in a way, claiming a new place for Yahweh, planting a church. It grows up and the community grows up around it, because it is the center, because it is the sacred space.
Okay. All right. Is this a fractal? That's not my question. Hold on. We're going to get into it. So hear me out. All right.
Okay.
So we go all the way back to Genesis, right? God makes man in his own image, right? Okay. Then we go a little bit further. We skip a few pages. We get to the Exodus, and we see this idea of a tabernacle that God has Moses build. And then we skip a couple pages, and we go and we see this big, beautiful temple that Solomon builds, right? We skip a few pages in the New Testament. We see King Herod and his reorchestration, I guess, of this temple, right? The second temple that was built, in the intermittent times, but still, we know it by King Herod's temple in the New Testament. Okay. Jesus goes to the cross. He dies. He rises from the dead. He's buried. He rises from the dead, right? Now, all of a sudden, we see this idea of people. Are you not the temple of the Holy Spirit? So not only, I think, does that show, fractals, but it shows the interconnectedness of different fractals. And so to say now that, well, guys, we're the epitome of what a temple is, the human is, that might be true, but at the same time, that doesn't, and even if we are our own sacred space to a degree, which the Holy Spirit indwells, right? Like the Shekinah glory in the Old Testament, that's the pattern I'm kind of seeing here. But just because we are a type and shadow, or even an antitype of what was portrayed in the Old Testament as a temple, that doesn't mean that there can't be other sacred spaces. And this is why Eastern Orthodox Christians, for example, they'll call their parish and the place they worship a temple, and they'll set it up like a temple, like the Old Testament Jewish temple. There are a lot of similarities between an Eastern Orthodox church and a Jewish, the Jewish temple, just in the layout, just in the structure and everything else, all of the images, all of the different, like, we got different tables for different things in the sanctuary, right? And so I say that to say, yes, these are fractals. But at the same time, I'm curious what you guys think about the idea of God starting with humans, right? And then it seems like once we reach the New Testament, we've went full circle to what a temple and sacred space really is. I don't know if that's the right word. We definitely seem to be at the top, or very, very close to the top of what a temple is, given that we're the climax and the Holy Spirit enters us, right? What do y'all think about that? Am I just like shooting off into left field, like just machine gunning words, making word salad, or what's going on here?
Jumping ahead, we're gonna
I was
get
gonna
to
say, we
that
ready
in a
for this?
minute.
'Cause I'm ready to go. Like, I'm ready to throw down on that question.
Let's
Why'd
do
you
it.
even bother with an outline, Amber? Come on.
Hey.
We're gonna get there in a minute.
All right.
Yeah,
All right,
see,
we're getting
Tyler.
there.
Tyler,
Come
you
on.
had early access to the outline, so. Although I will say, I think we were only on page 2 or something like that.
Hey.
We're far
Right.
I'm reading it as I go. I was playing Fortnite, Courtney. I'm sorry. Well, I had access. I didn't take it.
Yeah,
I'm
you
sorry.
did. You had access.
I had it, but I didn't
Mhm.
use it. I apologize.
Uh-huh. Yep. I see. I put all this work and Tyler doesn't even, he's like, oh, just go fly by the seat of my pants. Yeah, thanks a lot, Tyler.
Take a shot. No, man. We don't advocate getting drunk on here. I got a better idea. Let's read a chapter of the Bible every time I say Orthodox or Orthodoxy. Orthodox. There you go. All
The
right.
real game was every single time we said fractal. That was the
Fractal.
Right. That's from a chat group that Courtney and I are in that Spencer suggested every time somebody said fractal that we could turn it into a drinking game. So
gotta post
that's
that image
a
every time.
reference to that. But all right. So okay, so we kind of covered basically that a sacred space is something that is erected to honor anywhere that a deity's house or dwelling in that sacred space. So that becomes one of those things. It can be open air sanctuaries, chapels in private houses, separate small chapels located in the residential quarters of town. But the ultimate is a temple. Okay. And I'm going to skim through because we covered most of that already. Okay. All right. So I think the purification ritual for sacred spaces, I think we're going to jump down there because we covered most of the rest of that in that. So, in the Mesopotamian system, and we'll get into the difference in a minute, and we'll get back to your temple, tabernacle, person question after this part. So it's coming. We're going to get there. All right. So
burn. Gotcha.
Yeah.
But it is. It's a slow burn because you got to. There's some backload that you need to know here that applies to that conversation. So that's why I was like, jump in and head you off there at the pass because.
That's fine.
All right.
Hey, I'm not a dictator. You can jump in, cut me off. Good.
All right. Moving on. The purification ritual in the Mesopotamian systems is kind of a hodgepodge collection of this because they each have had their own thing and their own ways of doing things. But again, this is just kind of an amalgamation of all of them together in generality. So they first begin with preparation. So before the ritual begins, priests and temple staff had to prepare themselves by doing purification rituals that did different things like washing bodies, anointing with oil, donning clean sacred garments. Sometimes it was involved different concoctions or substances that might lessen the inhibition to the access to the divine, I guess. I don't know. That one gets a little weird looking into that one. So I didn't get too long into that rabbit hole because it got strange. But then there was the cleansing of the space itself. Or cleansing the space. So the temple or that sacred space, this is mostly in reference to temples too, by the way. So we get complicated here when we get into temples. So the temples themselves had some sort of a form of a sacred water that was taken from the holy place. That water was either springs or rivers or the basins or big massive things that they collected water in, and that water would be like sprinkled throughout. Like everything would get representatively sprinkled, not every inch, but every like a part of a wall would sanctify the wall.
Kind of like a house cleansing,
right? You didn't have to hose it down, but you could. Yeah.
We're not trying to put out fires here. Just a little holy water in the corner is good.
Right.
Okay.
Right. You just put some, or you could anoint with a sacred oil, and deity had their own blend of sacred oil, so it depended on which deity you're dealing with, what their blend of oil was.
Real quick, Amber, question. Did people do
yeah.
this, like pagans, did different pagans do like a mix of things like water and oil and blood? Or was one sect like water and then the other sect like oil? How did that work?
That I don't, Carrie.
I think sometimes. So it would depend, and the substance you're using would have the meaning in it. So it's not like this. Well, I mean, sometimes it would be like this culture over here would use water. This culture over here would use blood. It's like blood has a particular meaning and use here. And so you would have like the substance used, you would sometimes have the thing that is applying the substance that would also have a specific meaning. Like if you're using a certain kind of applicator that is doing it, like your finger versus a branch versus a rag, those would have different meanings behind those. So each ritual would have specific meaning, and it would depend on that's what is dependent on what you're using there for each thing.
Okay, appreciate that, Carrie.
Yeah, it does. It gets complicated, and they use the life, like blood has a meaning that is fairly universal between all of them, but they use it differently. Water has a common meaning through all of them, but they use it differently. Like these, fire has a similar symbolic meaning, but it's used differently.
Are they putting spices in it? Are they
Well, and that would make sense.
Oil or water and blood together to do something. Yeah. There are different ways that they do these things together.
Well, that would make sense too. Like you have all these different pagan groups, and even include Hebrew Israelites into this. Like they all kind of see blood and water meaning the same thing. Well, that makes sense if we all have a common ancestor, that all these traditions and meanings were delegated or spoken to through, right? They would, all I'm trying to say is it would make sense for even different cultures like worldwide, right? You see this universal understanding of meaning of what blood is and of what, and then, you got the Bible that says, well, the life is in the blood, right? It would make sense then for other pagans to see that, to see blood and say, oh, there's something to do with life here. Now, whether they do the ritual differently, I mean, that could just be a thing over time, but it's interesting that all these groups have the same, like, pictures and meanings of different symbols and things like that. That's all. Just I find that interesting.
Yep. Well, they're all living in the same context, in the same geographic area, dealing with the same struggles and issues and survivals and seasons, and they're in the same context. So a lot of their stuff is going to have similar. There's going to be a lot of overlap in symbolism and significance and practice.
What do you put on your French fries? Like different zones in the world are going to put different things on their French fries. Right.
Ketchup.
So they're going to have different. All right.
What?
So,
dude, bro, get out of here. What are you talking about?
I'm out of here, man. I've just been kicked out. I can go home now. Actually, I am home. So
you are home. What are you talking about?
Anyway, so every time a sacred space is created, or when a sacred space has been lost, because in the Mesopotamian context, in the ancient Near East context, I'm going to back up for just a little bit for a second here. Very, 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 very high view generally. The deity is tied to the land. So a deity's existence and his influence, his prowess, his power, his reputation is tied to the land, the size of the land, and the influence of that comes from that size of territory. The flourishing of that land. Is it, a weak deity is going to be in drought and famine and having a hard time surviving. A strong deity is going to be like the picture of the promised land that we see for the fulfillment of the covenant, flowing with milk and honey and abundance and overflow. So that's also part of being tied to the land, is how well your land is doing, not just how big it is, but how well it's flourishing and how strong it is in relation to the deities around it. And so you see a lot of this back and forth, conquering each other's territory is going to affect the size and influence of its deity. So trying to expand your territory for your deity is going to make your deity more influential, more powerful. And so there's back and forth conquering of territory to make their deity's territory bigger. In another part of that, there's a lot of factors involved there, so we'll just leave it at that. But so you don't see a deity going into another deity's territory to claim it. It is the monarch, the king, the army going in, the people going in to claim more territory to increase the influence, size, and strength of their deity. So they are the ones who are doing that. And
okay, so I have a couple of points for here.
Right.
This is where we can get into the disease thing.
Right.
Let me see if I can find where I found this. Second.
Yeah, the power of the deity is directly tied to the power of the people, and the people claim territory for the deity.
Right.
Yeah, so there's a
right.
relation there. This is from this is from the Journal of the Adventist Theological Society. There you go, Jamie.
There, Jamie. Hey.
Yeah. This is by Angel Manuel Rodriguez. It's called Ancient Near Eastern Parallels to the Bible and the Question of Revelation and Inspiration. Let me see what pages. Okay, going down to page 18. Sorry.
No, you're good.
So there's this Hittite ritual that he talks about. He says it's performed when the king and his army, returning from war, were affected by a plague. The king was to select a man, a woman, a bull, and a ewe from the land of the enemy for the ritual. They were presented to the god or goddess who caused the plague. The king or his appointee, representing the army, transferred the plague to the victims, who were not only transporters of the evil, but substitutes for the king and his army. The king prayed, "You, male god, be appeased with this decorated man, but to the king, the leaders, the army, and the land of Haiti, turn yourself faithfully, but let this prisoner bear the plague and carry it back into the land of the enemy." So that's kind of like guerrilla warfare kind of thing. Like disease, they go to attack, they're in enemy territory, they get disease, and the disease is they blame the other deities for the disease, because it wasn't our God who caused us to be sick, it was theirs, and they go back into their land with the disease. And so that's a really interesting just point of connection with what we're talking about in crossing territory and things like that. And my second point is, what about people who assume deities because they borrow them? Because we do see that.
Right.
They borrow deities. So those are my kind of 2 points for discussion there.
Who's the guy in the Old Testament that brought literal dirt back home?
Naaman.
Now that story makes sense. Why did he want to put a little bit of Hebrew dirt in the jar and take it back with him? Because he thought that was bringing Yahweh back with him. Not saying Yahweh's the dirt, but that Yahweh's connected to the literal ground that is the Hebrew Israelite nation. Right.
Nahum is creating his own sacred space in a foreign territory by bringing the land back with him.
Ooh.
And he even says, like, "Oh, we've got good rivers, like where I'm from. Like, what's so special about this river?" And it's like, well, go try it out and see.
Right.
And it's like that river is attached to the deity, who is Yahweh. Yeah.
Which that's interesting that he would be like, what's the big deal if he's already thinking these things? But
right. So here's my question at this point. And Amber, forgive me if you laid this out and I just missed it. But okay, what exactly is it that ties the deity to the land? So is this like so say there are nomads out there or sojourners just wandering around, and a group, a family, let's say, finds a spot, right? And nobody's there, right? And then they build up their territories. They build up, right? Just like Adam and Eve, Cain and Abel, whatever. They build it up. Do they discover, like, would a deity, and obviously we're getting outside the realm of scripture at this point, but I'm just curious, like, would a deity like make itself known to a person, or like maybe the chief leader of this place, and say, hey, I'm the deity of this land, worship me, whatever. Like, is that kind of how it works? Or I guess what I'm asking is, are they more discovered? Like the deity is discovered that owns that land per se? And secondly, if not, is this just something like the person, I don't want to say makes up, but like once they attribute the land to a certain deity, that's what makes the deity connected to the land. Does that make sense?
Right.
Usually it's theophany that identifies the land with the deity and the deity with the people.
Say that one more time, Courtney. I missed
Theophany is the thing that identifies the deity with the land and the deity with the people.
Theophany.
So the question then is, did they have a legitimate theophany or not?
Or, is it a demon appearing to them?
Well, exactly. So from the biblical perspective, God divided the nations and set the lower Elohim over them. So that's the correct answer. But the question then is, are those deities making themselves known? Or are people like, hey, we need a deity and we're going to, this is our deity, and we literally will make it up, and then the deity can attach himself to that. Like,
yes,
both things probably. Like, I think both things are going on. And can you tell the difference, and does it matter? That's the next question, right?
Right.
Well, and I think you have the same thing happening today, where people do know certain sympathetic magic rituals where you can summon entities, and they summon an entity to a place and then dedicate that place to that entity that they think they're summoning. So that happens
back to the magic. And magic will work on other deities, whereas it won't work on God. Potentially.
Okay. So it's a both and. People give the deity power, as well as the deity, obviously being created by God, has some form of power, but there has to be a participation between the two, it sounds like.
And I think that from the biblical perspective of the division of the nations and all of that, the reason why it was such a pull for them for the lower Elohim to be worshipped, whether or not they were, there's two views on whether or not they were rebellious to begin with, whether they were rebellious when God set them over. Either way, there is a pull for them to be worshipped. There's a reason they want to be worshipped, because that does manifest their power. If without people worshiping them, and I think this is going to be a big point I'll bring up later, without people worshiping them, they have no power and they vanish. And so that's a really key point to what Troy is asking here, I think.
Interesting.
And I think too, we want to be careful not to assume when somebody wanders into a deity's territory and comes in a relationship with that deity, they get handed a prepackaged set of here's how you worship me. That develops culturally through experience, through personal interaction with the deity and in their cultural context, and from borrowing back and forth with the intermixing and the chaos that's going on in the ancient Near East world, with the warring cultures and all of the back and forth and in and out and intermarrying and the stuff that's going on there. All of those pieces come together to develop these religious practices over long periods of time.
Right. And so we do not need to see similarities for it to be the case that we have the lower Elohim in action and they're being worshipped because of that historical interaction and development. If it could be that they're revealing things, because I think that's why we have idolatry, because it is a corruption of the image of God, which was original. And that's why that's a thing. They're like, oh, God has these images, we're going to do that too. And it's a corruption. And that's why that's a real reality. But not everyone has to have idolatry. that doesn't mean that the lower Elohim aren't involved and that there's nothing going on there.
Right. I just want to say too, real quick, just to our audience, just a little banter so forgive me. I'm not trying to throw anybody off track or anything like that. But y'all, this is an awesome, freaking awesome discussion. Okay. If y'all are enjoying this, please give us a like, hit the thumbs up button on the video. Leave some super chats. If you would, that would help us, keep the lights on and keep internet bills. And you can do that by clicking the little $ at the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. You can also support our ministry by donating via PayPal, Cash App, Venmo. All those links are in the description below. If you click the link that says Linktr.ee, I think after that it says like Faith Unaltered or something, but look for Linktr.ee, click that, or copy and paste it into your browser, and all of our donation tabs will come up. And also, we just ask, please share. Like, if you can't do that, we totally get it. Understand completely. Money's tight nowadays. Hopefully it'll get better since Trump's back in, but we'll see. But anyway, if you can't afford that right now, $2.99 a month or $4.99 a month, then please share this video. Please hit the thumbs up button. And also, please pray for all of us, corporately as a ministry and individually as hosts. We would all really, really appreciate that. So back to whoever was talking. Sorry, I just wanted to throw that in there.
All right. Did you have somebody, Courtney? Did you have something?
Oh, yeah. I just dominion is a really big aspect here. So when we said the people can give dominion over to these lesser entities, because we were initially given dominion in Eden. We will get to Eden in a minute, but we were given dominion over the land, and we were supposed to be the representatives of God throughout all the earth, and without the necessary mediator of these lesser Elohim. And so, if you were the Bedouin tribe just stumbling through the desert and felt like, oh, I desperately need a different deity to worship, then they technically do have dominion over that land if they wanted to have it. And but they can also cede dominion to one of these lesser Elohim by calling out to them and summoning them.
Right. So now we're gonna jump in both feet to how it's different with Israel, because when in these back and forth wars between these nations and the trying to increase your deity's influence and the dominion of your deity, as sacred spaces were taken, they could be repurposed or reclaimed to either the new coming in deity, or to be reclaimed when the territory is taken back for that deity back again. So you could reuse a designated sacred space because a divine presence happened there. So that is sacred in the very just act that a divine encounter happened in that place would make it sacred. So taking another deity's sacred space would also be claiming that sacredness for your deity. So you could definitely do the ritual process of claiming and sanctifying a space to reclaim a sacred space, either from another deity or when you recovered your sacred space from another deity.
Yeah.
It's like gang wars.
They also made the choice on occasion to decimate the location so much that it couldn't ever be used again. Right. So you have both things going on.
Ooh, Carrie, is that kind of like the idea of whenever, I forget his name off the top of my head, so intertestamental, Maccabean era, Antiochus. Antiochus the Fourth.
Yep.
Whenever he comes in and desecrates the temple, slaughters pigs, is he trying to make that to where it's not usable anymore?
Okay.
Right. Yep.
Yeah. And that's the same thing that's happening at Jericho.
Okay.
Which is why anybody who rebuilds on it, it says the one who rebuilds on it will lose both his first and his last son.
Oh, okay. So whenever you're talking about, they walk around the walls of Jericho, it falls, decimates. That is killing, in a sense, symbolically, the deity associated with that land.
Right.
That is what the promised land is about.
Yep.
Taking it back for God.
Yep.
I think that's so interesting. And then God sets Michael, the archangel, over Israel as their protector. Oh man. Okay. Sorry.
Right.
No more sidetracks.
So that's okay. So now that we've kind of built this long arc to, yes, these pagan nations can reclaim these sacred spaces for all of these reasons.
Okay.
Now we're going to get into how is Israel different, because Israel is different, because Yahweh is different. And so we're going to start with, I think, I'm going to skip that first one there because we kind of covered that already. Although there is an element to the lower Elohim existing and giving dominion in their spaces here, because we see in Joshua, they're given the promise that they will go into a land that they didn't build houses, they didn't plant vineyards, they didn't plant olive trees. It's already been prepared. So part of the function there of these other lower E Elohims was to prepare a place for God's people to come and claim that promised land. That was part of their function, was to make it so that when Israel got there, they walked in and took what was already ready. They didn't need to do all of the preparation to make this land flourishing. It was already flourishing when they got there. So there is that piece of that here as well. So they are claiming that sacredness of that space because it is being prepared for God's people. So we're going to start way back in Genesis 1. And I think a big part of what we are saying and why this works differently with Israel is because all of these spaces belong to God in the first place, because he is the one who created them. And his spirit, the Trinity, is intimately involved in all of those spaces. And therefore, God declares them holy and his from creation, from the beginning. And that's where we start with it all belongs to God in the first place.
Oh, I have the Hebrew pulled up.
Okay, go for it.
Which, by the way, I was talking to my husband tonight. It's so what are y'all talking about? I was like, well, Amber gave me a really loose thing to contribute to the stream, which was just basically everywhere where sacred spaces talked about, what does God say about it? And I was like, that's pretty much the entire Bible, at this point. So yeah, I'll pull
Sorry
up.
about that.
It's okay. But it is really important to kind of just show what God is saying here in Genesis chapter 1 and how significant it is, because Tyler, what you're talking about, that fractal pattern that we're going to see throughout scripture is, and I'm not even using it as a joke, you guys, is it starts really is laid the foundation right here. So I'll start sharing my screen again and figure this out.
Fractals.
It is fractals.
Okay.
I get a soundbite made for that picture every time I post it. Yes, you are. Put that back up there, Courtney. I'll add it to this.
Unshared it.
Oh, somebody unshared it, not me. Okay.
No, it was not me.
Is it sharing? Oh, there it is. Okay. So as we work through Genesis chapter 1, we're all familiar, it's the 7-day pattern. Most of you are probably familiar with John Walton's temple coronation dedication motif in Genesis chapter 1, that we have these 7 days of creation that represents the temple dedication motif. And I just have Genesis 2, 1 through 3 at the end here, just so you can see what's going on. But in the first 6 days, we get God declaring each day, it was good, it was good, it was good, it was good, it was good. And the 6th day, it was very good, right? So here on the 7th day, something very special is taking place. And what we'll see here is Genesis 2, 1 through 3 mirrors Genesis 1, 1 and 2, except there are 35 words here in this section. So it's 5 times 7 words, whereas Genesis 1, 1 and 2 is 21 words. So this is even better, so 21 verse 35 is still a multiple of 7. But we start in this section, and they were finished, the skies and the land and all of their hosts. So we start out in the beginning, that in the beginning God created the skies and land. And now he's added their host, or their armies is a literal word there. Their armies that are going to rule and have dominion over the skies and the land. And so he finished his work. So these verbs here that I've highlighted in red are really important. He finished his work on the 7th day, all his work which he did, and he rested on the 7th day from all his work which he did, and he blessed the 7th day, and he sanctified it. So God is taking this good, very good creation, and now he is taking it and blessing it and sanctifying it. So he's going from good to holy. Good to holy is a very important thing that's happening here in this 7th day, this shift. And it's even better than every day that came before. And we can see that because, like I said, we got these 35 words, this, 5 times 7 words, where we're going from good to blessed and holy. So it's just really important to notice that pattern, because that's going to be what happens every single time God dedicates something as sacred space.
So Courtney, real quick, is that why later on it will say God saw that it was very good, is because after this, or before he makes that claim that the creation is very good, he's blessed it and sanctified it?
So the very good happens at the end of Genesis chapter 1 on the 6th day. So everything is
okay.
good. And the very good is referring to the creation of mankind. And so, so he's created
Gotcha.
all of, the heavens and the earth and all of their armies. And so mankind is the fulfillment of the armies of the earth, right?
Yep.
And so now we have everything that's there that's necessary for God's temple, but now we're going to consecrate the temple. We're going to sanctify it. We're going to make it holy. So the whole earth is God's temple, and he dwells therein. Or as Isaiah chapter 6 says, he says, he's the Lord, the God of armies. Holy, 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 the Lord, the God of armies. The whole earth is the fullness of his glory. That's what Isaiah chapter 6 says.
Okay. The cosmic temple.
The cosmic temple. So Isaiah 6 picks up on this Genesis 1 and 2 pattern. They didn't ask me where to make the chapter breaks, but this should have been still included in chapter 1. So.
Agreed.
Okay. So, and then the 8th day of creation is the day that we live into. And so we'll see this 8th day come up and be very significant throughout the rest of the sacred texts as well. So for you Orthodox folks out there, you probably just got really excited whenever I said that.
I did.
So we have 7 days of this temple dedication, and the 8th day is the day that we live into as new creation. Beginning there in Genesis chapter 2.
Are we in the 8th day now, Courtney?
We're in the 8th day now. Yeah. But we'll see this 8-day pattern come up again in Exodus, which is really cool. So if I don't know what Amber has planned next, but that was my Hebrew contribution to show like, oh yeah, every single time, generally speaking, if you want to see intentionality, look for where God is talking or where he's doing something. And if you see a repetition of 3 or just even a doubling, then there's something significant there. And it's just like, oh, why does he say on the 7th day he did this, which he did? And you're like, oh, well, like, why does it keep on saying that 3 times over? And it's because he's taking it from good to blessed and then holy. Good to blessed and then holy.
Just out of curiosity, Courtney, do you know in the Septuagint whether, so I forget I don't know Hebrew at all. So the Hebrew word for sanctified, do you know if hagiadzo is put in there for the Septuagint?
I don't know if it's put in there for the Septuagint, but it is a parallel. I can look it up real quick. So.
Yeah, that'd be awesome. I'm just curious.
I mean, generally speaking, the Hebrew word kodesh or kadosh or the verb form kadash, some form of hagiadzo is used. So I can double check and make sure in that particular one it is.
I'm more so curious to see if there's another word, because hagiadzo is the only word I know in the Greek that talks about like sanctification or dedicating something as holy. I just didn't know if there was another word that
yeah, I can look it up and see.
I'm sure they had something, but I don't know if it was used or not.
I think this is just like while Courtney's looking that up, I want to tie this in because I think this also is reflected in John 1 when we're talking about creation there and that the word and that all wraps it up so beautifully, that because that word is involved in creation and permeates creation, all of it belongs to God because it all belongs to the created word that was spoken in that whole. So it's echoed again in the New Testament, this idea that all of the creation belongs to God, and all of creation is, like Courtney just explained, made holy through this process of good, very good, and then made holy. So
well, and here's something that I've noticed, and that's really interesting. Modern paganism, like neo-paganism. Neo-paganism pretends to be from ancient paganism, but really, in so many ways, it is this weird hodgepodge of things. In ancient paganism, you really didn't have the idea of God creating the cosmic temple. That's like a true idea from the Bible, right? That's not like a broad concept from the ancient Near East. I mean, the deities created the earth and there was similar things going on, but it wasn't in the same context that we have, especially with mankind being the image of God and all of that kind of thing. But you go to neo-paganism texts and people today, and they will talk about how all of creation is sacred, and it's no longer, they're no longer talking about specific sacred space. I mean, they do, like, you know, thin spaces and this space and that space are all special, you know, that's why Stonehenge is amazing and blah, blah, blah. But they're now talking in terms that you hear about all creation is sacred. And it's like,
Right.
you know what, you're not getting that from ancient paganism. I'm sorry. So just an interesting point, because there is a really big disconnect. And if you are engaging with people who are in those realms of belief, I think it's really important to acknowledge that they have this amalgamation of pagan and Christian belief, because that's what it is. Like, and you'll see, I mean, I've even seen people talking this week about the tenets of Satanism and, oh, isn't this one great? Like, what's wrong with these right here? Like, you realize that the only reason they can speak about those things is because of Christianity.
Yep.
That is the only reason they're even coming up with these as moral categories and as good things, is because of Christianity. Full stop, end of story.
That's stealing from a worldview. Just saying.
That's right.
Where you get the concept of Satan from other than the Bible? Come on.
Okay. So first of all, we're saying that Yahweh can take these sacred spaces because they're his sacred space in the first place, that have been stewarded by these other Elohim for the return of his people. And ultimately we get to Revelation and the final day of the Lord and the final ultimate restoration, reconciliation, redemption of creation into full sacred space instead of pockets of sacred space. It becomes a full sacred space.
Hey, Amber, can I get a follow-up
Yeah.
real quick? So just in case anybody's wondering in the chat, because I would be interested in answering this question too, but could we say that, so I know a lot of people that bring up like the conquest of Canaan, and this is something that like God morally flubbed up on, right? Like he should not have done this. Right. Is it an appropriate response to say, well, if you look at it like what we've been talking about, Canaan is actually God's, and these people are more so the tenants, and he's the landlord. He can evict people whenever he wants to. Is that appropriate? And not a one for one, obviously, but could we like use that analogy for the conquest of Canaan if somebody has an objection to that on moral standards? And then well, I'm just gonna add real quick, and then the objection to them from my point of view anyway would be like kind of what Carrie said is, well, you're appealing to morals, which are a Christian worldview anyway. So, but anyway, what are your thoughts about the conquest of Canaan?
I love this question because like I love the book of Joshua. It's one of my absolute favorites. And one of the things that we see in Joshua is there's only actually 3 major battles that are recorded in Joshua, and there's a lot of more record of getting to a place that's already empty. And a lot of what is going on in that overall narrative of that story is the other nations and the other deities are seeing what has been happening with Yahweh and the Exodus, and they understand who Yahweh is in a way that Israel doesn't even get. They see this deity who did the impossible in Egypt and has toppled the Egyptian pantheon coming their direction, and they are saying nope, and they run away. So Israel is coming into a mostly empty land, but the spots that have battles are very cosmically important. So there is some cosmic spiritual warfare happening in the locations that there are battles going on there, but it's not the fact that they come in and do mass genocide to everyone who ever lived there ever. Most of them have already fled because they look at Yahweh and they know that Yahweh is going to come in and do the same thing to their deity that he just did to Egypt's, and so they run away. So it's not this mass genocide of an entirety of a whole bunch of civilizations that's happening there. So it's very, very centralized for a very cosmic geography, spiritual warfare purpose that's happening. So we don't have a God who is vengefully killing everyone.
Right. If that was the case, they would run after them and go kill them. They'd be like, they'd still be conquering. They'd say, where did you go? We've got to find you. And they don't do that.
Right.
Okay. Appreciate that.
Well, and that's part of the what you read Exodus, it's the same kind of language with the glory of God and what's going on. You read Numbers, same kind of thing. That's what you see.
Right.
The glory of God going before them, and everybody's like, whoa, we know what's happening here. We're going to try and stem something and do something about that, or leave, because we know what's happening.
Yeah,
Right.
it like melts their hearts, or it says multiple times.
Right.
But another thing that Matthew Lynch points out in his book, Flood and Fury, I think Flood and Fury, yeah, he says that the outposts where they have great battles are outposts of Egypt, because that land in Canaan would have still been ruled by Egypt. So in many ways, whenever they are whenever they are going to battle against those military outposts, they are kind of continuing that deliverance project from Egypt that had begun with the parting of the Red Sea. And the last point that I often like to make about that, if people want to bring that up as a moral objection, is that God says that he will do the same thing to his own people if they violate his land. So in Deuteronomy 27 and 28, if they violate his land, then the covenant curses are exile. And so that's exactly what happens. Like, he drives them out of his own land. Because the land is that important to him, because the land reflects his glory.
Right. It's really simple. It sounds like obey God and you prosper. I mean, don't disobey and you perish. It's the exact same concept we have now in the New Testament, which is why Christians all the time are saying, believe in the Lord Jesus Christ, you'll be saved, right? A lot of people don't even understand what that means, which is fine. That's why we're here, right? But it's just a simple trust, and in that, right, God changes you to want to obey him. There's nothing different. And so once we do obey him and, try to live our lives as Christ-like as we can, then the promises for that are blessings and not curses. But if we continue to run off in disobedience, and I'm speaking to myself more than I am anybody. This is just a host check for me. No, I'm being for real.
Right.
Like, disobedience leads to death. I love how Father Stephen DeYoung and Father Andrew Damick, excuse me, we're talking on Lord of Spirits about like participating in God, participating with God, or participating in demons and with demons, right? Whatever, there is no middle option. So if you're not doing A, by default, you're doing B. And whatever image we are participating in and with, that's who we become more like. That's why one of the promises for Christians is sanctification, right? Protestants call this sanctification, Orthodox call it theosis, but all in all, it's the process of becoming like Jesus. What he is by nature, we become by grace. And so participating in him, i.e. the Eucharist, baptism, communion in church, fellowship, all of those things, they make us more like him. And so this is the practical part of the episode where I encourage people to be more like Christ, including myself. Like, I'm harping on myself at this point, like get a big arrow and like throw it over my head, but just be more like Christ and everything goes better in the end. And now, right? So anyway, you're muted, Amber.
Okay.
There you go.
So we're at 2 hours and we still haven't even gotten into Tabernacle and Temple yet. So I'm wondering if we don't need to do a part 2 to this, because that could take us a while.
No, I'm so ready. Look at me.
Oh, okay.
I've got bookmarks. So
we'll do it.
We're almost done. We got through this whole outline in 2 hours.
Yeah.
We're at the last paragraph.
All right.
Let's do it.
All right. So we got to jump in. Tabernacle is where we start. So the thing that one of the major things that makes Israel and Yahweh different is there are not a lot of other ways that are mobile sacred space. So the tabernacle is so that God can go with his people. So you've got a portable dwelling place, and everywhere they stop, there has to be a cleansing of that space because you have to have a place to set up the tabernacle. So the ground has to be reclaimed and declared sacred to set up the tabernacle. And it's very specific instructions. This, I mean, if you read that after the story of the Exodus, most of the rest of Exodus is parenthesed with the very extremely detailed instructions for the tabernacle, how it's to be built, the materials to be used, the imagery that's put into it, who the craftsmen in charge are. They are actually called out by name. These guys are going to be in charge of this, how it's set up, who's allowed to set it up, who's allowed to carry it, who can touch what. It is so like minutely detailed because this is a mobile temple, the tabernacle is a mobile temple that is everywhere it goes, establishing a sacred space. So that is something that is unique to Yahweh, at least that I could find. I didn't find anything else on this scale anywhere else in any of these ancient religions. Courtney has something.
I'm ready.
Sure.
I'm so ready. This is like where I was like ready to throw it down. This was like my one task, y'all. So I'm ready to go. All right. So I'm going to just recommend this book called by Gary Anderson, That I May Dwell Among Them, Incarnation and Atonement in the Tabernacle Narrative. And he really just walks through the building of the tabernacle and how significant that is throughout the book of Leviticus, what it symbolizes, like Exodus, Leviticus, and Numbers, and how that symbolizes various things related to God and his economy and Genesis and those kinds of things. So if you want to go in a deeper dive of what I'm talking about, I would say start there with Gary Anderson. It's like pretty fresh scholarship. I think it was released in 2023, and it's just very good. But one thing that he notes in studying through Exodus, because most of us get bogged down in our yearly Bible reading plans right there at the time in which, they say reading plans go to die in Leviticus. I actually think that they die in the back half of Exodus, personally, where it's like we repeat the same instructions for this tent twice. But one thing that he notes in there is that if you pay attention to how this tent is constructed, that as you get closer to the Holy of Holies and to the most sacred furniture in this tent, you actually get longer descriptions. So, as we're describing like the curtains on the outside, there's relatively little description of that. But as you get closer to the inside, the things that are most sacred or most holy, like the Ark of the Covenant, then you get a longer description. So there's this like inverse relationship in sacrality there, and even just the language that is used. And he also points out in Exodus 29, so for people who would, maybe like to say that the sacrifices are a backup plan for God or a punishment for Israel, Exodus 29 happens before the golden calf incident and really tells us why God has instituted these sacrifices. So I'm going to start in Exodus 29, verse 42. It shall be a regular burnt offering throughout your generations at the entrance of the tent of meeting before the Lord, where I will meet with you to speak to you there. There I will meet with the people of Israel, and it shall be sanctified by my glory. There's our sanctification word again. I will consecrate or sanctify the tent of meeting and the altar. Aaron and his sons also I will consecrate or sanctify. Same word, kadash. And to serve me as priests, I will dwell among the people of Israel, and I will be their God. And they shall know that I am the Lord, the God of Israel, who brought them out of the land of Egypt, that I might dwell among them. I am the Lord, their God. So the sacrifices are instituted so that sacred space can be maintained and that God can access his people and his people can access their God. Right. That is why the sacrifices are instituted. It is for a very positive reason. And if you're looking in the Hebrew, it just repeats over and over and over, like there. That is an unnecessary pronoun. And it just keeps, I'm going to meet them there. I'm going to meet them there. And that phraseology of that they shall know that I am the Lord their God, that is what's called the covenant formula. That I will be their God and they will be my people. And it's repeated over and over and over again. This is a relationship that God is establishing. So I'm going to pause there, but I could go on for a lot longer in case you guys got questions.
Right. No, we could go on this one forever. But yeah, and I also wanted to just add to that. I just forgot what I was going to say. So never mind, because tabernacle dwelling, I don't remember now.
Okay. Well, I'm not done with this little section.
Okay.
Of Exodus.
Go ahead.
Because it gets into how sacred time and sacred space overlap.
Oh.
So at the end of the book of Exodus, you have in Exodus chapter 40, the glory of God coming down and consuming, and coming and resting on this tent, right? So that's Exodus chapter 40. In Leviticus chapter 8, you have the consecrations of the priest. And then in Leviticus 8 and 9, and in Numbers chapter 9, you have the celebration of the first Passover, where the fire of the Lord consumes the first sacrifice. In the Hebrew Bible, all of those are the exact same day. Like those three things all happen on the exact same day. They are told at three different points in the story, so that you see the dwelling of God in the tent and the consecration of the priest and the consummation of the first sacrifice is three separate events. So it slows down so you really get the point. But that happens on the 8th day after this tent has been consecrated. So you repeat those 7 days of creation, of consecration, those 7 days of creation again. And on the 8th day, God comes and dwells in the tent. The priesthood is sanctified and the sacrifice is consumed. So whenever they are doing these sacrifices, remember I said that God said that this is why they do the sacrifices, to maintain the presence of God. The fire that is on the altar is the fire of the Holy Spirit that consumed the first sacrifice. So every single time they add a sacrifice in those daily sacrificings to maintain that fire, they're maintaining that fire from Sinai that represents God's very presence with the people. So the fire is more important to the sacrificial system than the sacrifices themselves. The fire represents God to the people. And it happens on the 8th day. And so it's a new creation moment for Israel. Like God is reconsecrating all of creation at Sinai. Okay, so I'm going to pause right there and we're going to go look at Maccabees, okay? Because if you're like, hey, the fire is this important, we're going to go check it out at Maccabees. Are you ready for this, Amber? Because we're about to
wait. I have to take my headphones off because Protestants aren't supposed to listen to Maccabees. We could spontaneously combust. Come on.
Yes, God's presence is a consuming fire. That fire comes down and consumes the sacrifice, represents him with the people. And so whenever they go off into exile, what happens, right? The temple is destroyed. And we see Ezekiel gets this vision where the Holy Spirit follows his people into exile. Well, this did not occur to me really until reading Gary Anderson's book. But that Holy Spirit riding this throne chariot into exile with the people into Babylon. Also, this is the same process that also happens with the fire. The priests take the fire from the temple and take it with them into Babylon. And this is recorded in 2 Maccabees chapter 1. And they hide it in a cave. They hide this fire in a cave because they know we're going to go back eventually. And we need to maintain this Sinai fire because this is when God met us on Mount Sinai. And eventually we're going to go back and rebuild this temple. So we need to take the fire with us. Right. Okay. So I'm going to pause there. Then I'll go and read 2 Maccabees. Unless you have questions or thoughts. Because this was mind blowing to me whenever I figured this out. Carrie's nodding along like she's always known this, which I wouldn't doubt at all. But so yeah, they go and they find the fire, and all that's left is kind of like this oil from maintaining the fire. And so the priests sang hymns after sacrifices had been consumed. Nehemiah gave orders that the rest of the liquid be poured over some large stones as they're rededicating this fire. Immediately a fire blazed up. This is 2 Maccabees chapter 1, by the way. I don't think I mentioned it. But it was extinguished by a flame from the fire on the altar. So this fire that was taken into Babylon is brought back. News of what happened spread everywhere. The Persian emperor heard that a liquid had been found in the place where the priests had hidden the altar fire just before they were taken into exile. He also heard that Nehemiah and his friends had used this liquid to burn the sacrifice on the altar. When the emperor investigated the matter and found out that this was true, he had the area fenced off and made into a shrine. It became a substantial source of income for him, and he used the money for gifts to anyone who was in his good favor. Nehemiah and his friends called the liquid Nephthar, which means purification, but most people call it naphtha. So the king of Persia even takes this cave where the fire was hidden and makes it a shrine to the God of Israel. because he was like a god dwelled there.
Mm-hmm.
Which then is why the Hanukkah, or the maintenance of the fire, is really important as well.
That's amazing.
I know, it's amazing. So then this is the same consuming fire that comes down on the apostles in the upper room on Pentecost. Is the Spirit consecrates them as the new altar of the Lord, just like that altar of the Lord was consecrated on Sinai. So this is how we get to Jesus, you guys, and this is how we get to. So whenever that temple is maintaining that fire, all things then participate in the energies of God, and then are like become little mini theophanies of God that are the temple furniture. And Gary Anderson, I'm just going to read this in his book, that the ark becomes a marker of the divine presence, but not just the ark. Like if you go to Psalm 48, it says, walk about Zion, go all around about it, count its towers, consider its wells, and go through its citadels, that you may tell the next generation that this is God, our God forever. And that the word zeh is like pointing it out. It's like saying, this is God. Like when you're pointing at the walls of Jerusalem, you are pointing at the God of Israel. And so when Paul says that we become living stones of this temple, it does not mean that sacred space has been gotten rid of. It means that where we gather, people now should be able to point at us and say, this is the God of Israel, that we are the living stones of the tabernacle, as he says in Ephesians chapter 2, that's built on the foundations of the apostles and the prophets. Because we carry forth this sacred fire from Pentecost.
Mm-hmm.
So, that's like my rock moment, I guess, but that's how it all ties into Jesus, you guys.
I'm speechless.
Well, and I love that we've brought this up, because I do see it often where people are like, we're the temple and therefore nothing else is. And so, Troy he's right about the fractals. He just is.
Right. Yeah. Oh, and I love
it's a fractal.
I love Gary Anderson says, like, some readers will no doubt get nervous at the suggestion that the tabernacle building somehow shared in the presence of God. Israel's religion was famously aniconic in the sense that any representation of the deity in the form of a statue was strictly forbidden. But, it doesn't matter. It's like if we get upset, matter and spirit interpenetrate in the Hebrew Bible. And he goes on to quote, just for you Orthodox friends out there, St. John of Damascus. And
yes.
So John of Damascus gives this type of spiritual grounding to our creaturely nature. And so John of Damascus says, because we are twofold, fashioned of soul and body, because our soul is not naked, covered as if by a veil, it is impossible for us to attain to spiritual things apart from corporeal realities. So the fact that God has attached himself to people or to places is just the nature of him revealing himself to us as creatures. This is just the normal way that he does it.
I think Troy said it best, not mere symbolism.
Mm-hmm. And, this is in Gary Anderson's book, if you guys want to go and check it out. I also like how, if you've ever been to an Eastern Orthodox Vespers or Divine Liturgy, he talks about how, we've often heard that the curtain was only opened once a year, like on the Day of Atonement, to the Holy of Holies. But this is not true. The curtain was opened every morning and evening sacrifice, because it represented God coming out and receiving the sacrifice that was laid on the altar. And so every morning and evening sacrifice, the curtain is open all the way to the Holy of Holies. So if you're there worshiping in the temple and offering up prayers, you can actually see all the way through to the Ark of the Covenant. And so that process still happens in a Vespers service or in the Divine Liturgy, where in the Vesper service, there's a moment when the curtain is closed and then when the curtain is opened, because it represents the people being able to see God. And that moment of the evening sacrifice, especially, was seen as a place in which your prayers were especially efficacious, where things like God was closer because he had come out of his sacred space to meet the people at the altar.
It's amazing, isn't it?
Yeah.
But
the fractals are overloading my brain.
Fractals are overloading. Yes. Yeah.
That was a really good job, Courtney, and really
Thanks.
good research.
Okay.
I need some time to digest that a little bit before I think I have any questions on that. But other than that, very well said. Audience,
Right.
if you have any questions for Courtney or Carrie or Amber or myself,
Well,
let
I
us know.
think that there is a layer that Troy means. I'm going to put this in I'm going to blame Troy on this of the question.
Right.
Like, especially from a practical point of view, right? For Christians taking over pagan spaces. And does that mean it's like, does it stick? When we take over a space, does it stick? And Jamie made a comment earlier as well about how God is using the rebellious deities for his own purposes. And that is really essential to this question and how I think we can answer it. Because I think, in a sense, it doesn't have to stick even today, because people can still make choices. They can still rebel against God. And is God going to zap them and then they can no longer do pagan rituals in a place? No. I mean, maybe that happens. It probably has happened in the past, right? Where you have a pagan space, Christians have come along and dedicated it to God, and then pagans will come and try to retake that space and it doesn't work. I believe absolutely. I don't have any stories of that right now, but I've heard of things that happen like that, right? But it doesn't happen every time. So again, it's not magic, for one thing. So that there's the magical element. It's not just magic, but also people can rebel, and God can still use that rebellion for his own purposes to bring people to him.
Mm-hmm.
And so the idea that it is all God's space, but that it can be for a time taken over by rebellious deities or people who are worshiping others who are not to be worshipped, that can still happen. It's not like a Christian is going to come along and dedicate a space and we can just leave it and it's no longer there. And the other thing about that also is that I think what we see in Christian history is with the going forth of Christianity and the receding of paganism that we see in history is a real thing. And that is a real taking over of sacred space. When we make disciples, we're taking over sacred space and all of that kind of thing. And also with that, we can still see that battle going on, though. Like there's the already but not yet thing going on, and the deities who are, they've been delegitimized, they've been taken out of power. And see, I knew it was your fault, Trey. They've been taken out of power. They're still active in the world, though. And that just because Christ is victorious doesn't mean they have no power, because I think they still do. They can still have the power that people are going to provide for them through the manifestation of the worship. However, when paganism is defeated and those deities disappear in time, they can, and they do, and they have. That doesn't mean they can't come back, because they do. We also see that. So I think there's still a war going on. There's still things going on until the eschaton. And you still have the two sides that are still battling it out. Mm-hmm. So yes, we can take sacred space. Yes, it has always been Yahweh's. And it can and is and will be always Yahweh's. And when we have a presence there and we are active, see, this is also the benefit of the church and its active involvement in creation. When we are involved there, then they cannot take it back. However, when we leave, when we're disinterested, when we just kind of go our own direction and we're not really paying attention, we might say they can still move in and be active and things. And God can still use that, because he can still use the rebellious spirits for his own purposes. I think, when people want to go their own direction, God will just allow them to do that. And those rebellious spirits will take that opportunity to play their part in that. There's still rebellion, but God is using that rebellion as judgment as well. Just like when we rebel and God gives us over to our desires, that is an active participation of us and God and judgment.
Right.
Go ahead, Courtney. Go ahead.
Oh yeah, no, I was just thinking about
so.
what Carrie said. Yeah, we'll think about what Carrie said for a while. But yeah, no, I do think that we do see this kind of interchange of space these days. Like, like the Hagia Sophia is a really great example of that, where it was taken over and then made into, an Islamic mosque. And so that happens still to this day. But if Christians were to reclaim that land, then we could reclaim the space as well. And what a lot of people will say is like, oh, well, when the temple was destroyed, sacred space, God's sacred space on earth, kind of went away. And now it just is in, like, we are the only sacred space that there is. But what Carrie was saying is really important, is that we actually play a really particular role in sacralizing a space. And this is the same pattern that we've laid out all throughout the Old Testament, that the power of the deity is reflected by the power of the people who worship him. Not that we can add anything to God's power, but that in worshiping God, we are proclaiming this space as his and his territory. And if we cede our role as proper imagers of God, then we will see our churches taken back over, or we will see our cities ceded to other entities and other powers, right? But if we participate with God, then we will see God's glory grow and flourish in our land, right? So that context is critical, as Jamie says. It's not that we're adding anything to God's power, but we are participating. We are truly able to participate in the kingdom of God. And like N.T. Wright says, we're making little outposts of heaven whenever we gather to meet and worship. We are sacralizing the space where we meet and worship, so that relationship between the deity, the people, and the territory still holds even to this day. So just because we are, walking living stones of the temple doesn't mean that we are not physically connected to a place, because I live in a city and I want to see my city proclaim Christ in all four corners, right? And so that means I am connected to this place. So it's not a disembodied temple. It is very much a real, concrete instantiation of God in sacred space.
See, this is why I let Courtney go first, because now I don't have to work quite as hard to bring back around and loop in Tyler's question from earlier about Tabernacle, Temple, Church, because this is what is happening. It is taking the mobile presence of God, creating sacred spaces everywhere we go, that was transitioned to the temple, which I find really, really interesting, that God orders the tabernacle. David asks for the temple. So it's a shift of one of those things, I think, that is, man asks for something outside of what the tabernacle was intended to symbolize and to be, and it's like asking for a king. That's not my original design, but I'll let you go with it because that's what you want. And it shifts it to everyone comes to God instead of God going with everyone everywhere they go. And then we sit in that space with the temple. And then back when we get into the New Testament in the church and through Christ, that goes back to a tabernacle type image. And that's, the temple is destroyed because it doesn't need to be there, that we go one place central to worship Yahweh. It is back to a mobile tabernacle type idea that goes with us through churches, through ourselves, that we carry that tabernacle dwelling. It's not a permanent fixture that everyone goes to. It is decentralized from that request of David and Solomon back to being the tabernacle mobile image that it was intended to be, but that God prescribed instead of that man asked for. So I think that does that answer your question, Tyler?
Yeah. Yep.
Okay.
I think so.
Well, and I do want to highlight that Christians did see the sacred spaces of Israel as their own sacred spaces, so they established temples, and they established churches in Mamre, on Abraham's altar, and they still went to worship in the temple while it was still standing. So those sacred places that were sacred places to Israel became sacred places to Christians because they were worshiping the God of Israel. So they didn't get removed. So even once the temple was destroyed, it still maintained that same function. It's an important pilgrimage site because, it says God caused his name to dwell there forever, and his eyes and his heart will be there forever. And it doesn't lose that significance just because, the temple is no longer there. Mount Zion plays a significant role for us even to this day. But it is interesting, like we become living stones, and then like the historic practice of the church is to build churches on the relics of the saints, right? So
Right.
on the living stones of the saints.
Right.
Exactly.
Right. So I think just to kind of, it's been 2.5 hours now to kind of land this plane. I want to just kind of go back and just where we started. Pagan religions had sacred spaces, and they claimed and reclaimed them in the struggle of the back and forth. But Israel is different because all of these spaces are his to claim in the first place, and that he is reclaiming that which he lent. And so we see that it is still a pattern that is continuing. So that was a long time to answer Troy's question, but it was so much fun. I absolutely had a blast, and this was a great question. And I think one of the things that I love most about doing this is pulling out something that people either have never thought about before, or that is really misunderstood, because if you don't understand context of Old Testament and ancient Near East civilizations and the actual pattern and imagery that is going on here from Genesis to Revelation, and this overarching umbrella of biblical theology, intertextuality, and this is why the narrative matters so much. We miss, look at what we have just pulled out for Troy's question. That is something that has blown everybody's mind that has worked on this project. That has just been 2.5 hours of epic awesome. And I have just had a blast, because this is epic awesomeness. So we're going to just kind of start, I think, go around, and I want to start with Carrie, and then have Courtney go, and then I'll go, and then Tyler can do the final thoughts of the night to wrap that up. So Carrie, start us off. Final thoughts.
All right. Yeah, I really appreciate Troy and his question, because it's awesome. Awesome framework for a question. Awesome framework for an investigation. And personally, I absolutely adore the topic of sacred space. Coming from LDS perspective, where we have temples, I grew up with the idea of, I'm going to go to the temple someday, and you have to live in order to make yourself worthy of that. And then entering into a fully historically Christian space of understanding what that means, it's very, very impactful for me personally, because of that previous connection I've had, and because of what it means for the vocation of us as the church. And the fact that, I'm not Eastern Orthodox, I'm not Catholic, I don't call myself Protestant, but for me, when I'm intersecting in all of those spaces, and I see different people interacting with, this is what church is, and this is what church it is not. And is it the invisible church? Is it the visible church? Is it the building? And it's, all of the things all at the same time. And if you don't have saying the church is invisible doesn't mean that there's no visibility to it, because there's no manifestation if there's no visibility to it. And one of the ways that I love referring to the church is as the body of Christ, because we are his hands and feet, and we are the image of God. All of the things that my favorite things all come together in all of this. So thank you, Troy, for that question, and for giving us a chance to really nerd out on it and dig deep into it.
Yeah, so my final thoughts are going to be trying to, again, just kind of weave together some of these threads from creation all the way to the end, and how that ties in with sacred space. So again, just from Genesis chapter 1, we have 7 days of creation. On the 7th day, it's consecrated as holy, and then we live in the 8th day as creation, right? And then at Mount Sinai, we have the 7 days of building the tabernacle, consecrating it, consecrating the priesthood and the first sacrifice, and God consumes it on the 8th day. And then with Jesus, we have the 7 days of that second Passover, right? And on the 8th day, it is consecrated by his resurrection. And so we now live, again, into that new creation. So there's a creation in Genesis 1, there's a new creation in Exodus 20, 4, Exodus 40, Leviticus chapter 8, Numbers chapter 9, however you want to count that. And then now there's this new creation that we live into. So now you can see why Paul uses imagery like new creation or second Adam, and then why John picks that up as well.
Mhm.
And so sacred space is intimately connected with the revelation of God, with his people, and creation. And there's this quote by the scholar named Mircea Eliade. He's like a scholar of religion that if you read books on sacrifice, you come across him quite a bit because he has a book called The Sacred and the Profane. So kind of those terms we were talking about at the very beginning. And he says, sacred time is indefinitely recoverable, indefinitely repeatable. From one point of view, it could be said that it does not pass, that it does not constitute an irreversible duration. So then we as a church, when we participate in Holy Week or we participate in Nativity, then we are participating in these sacred moments as if we were there again for the first time, and not just the ones that happened in the past, but also the ones that will be happening in the future that we will participate in then. So we are standing before God on those sacred days in his sacred place as his sacred and sanctified people.
Mhm. I think for me, my takeaway from this project has been, one, I got to spend quite a bit of time going down rabbit holes on all kinds of really fun stuff and nerding out like crazy. I absolutely adore this. And Troy's one of my favorite people on the planet for asking this question, because it has been absolutely amazing. And to sit here with Courtney and Carrie and get this, I mean, this has been, I don't know about you guys, but I have absolutely loved every second of it. And
I'm glad we missed Troy's question last week.
That's right. So, but I also, and one of the things that we did, I think Courtney brought it up for just a second that we didn't get to get into, that I didn't even include because I just knew we weren't going to have time to get to it, was how this touches on the image of God and how that makes it so that as the image of God and as that mobile tabernacle, we are a sacred space. And so when you are coming from a place of where you are broken, where we are looking for and longing in that dwelling place with God, with that dwelling place with Yahweh, how healing and redemptive is it to realize that we were created from the beginning, that we are that sacred space that God claims, and that the blood of Christ is that claiming mark that makes us that sacred space that nothing and no one can take that away from us. So we are permanently a sacred space in the blood of Christ. And so to bring that into the image of God and to what that means for us as a person and as people is just, to me, has just been mind-blowingly a connection that I hadn't fully gotten to until I started digging into this question for Troy. So here's another thing to put on the pile that I owe Troy for is asking this question, because this has been absolutely amazing. So Tyler?
I can't add anything to what y'all said other than, if all of this went over your head, and I'm being serious, if you're sitting there and you're wondering, what in the world did they just get done talking about? Take this away from this. You're valuable. Simple. This is why you're valuable, because not only are you made in the image of God, we fully circle back into you are now, because of the Holy Spirit, and if your faith is in Christ, you are the temple that God indwelt, that God is indwelling, and this is a permanent thing. And so God sees your value so much that he died for you. Number one, Jesus says that there is no greater love that a person can show other than to die for one's friends. And Jesus says, you are my friend if you do what I say. And so I would just take, for anybody that, the theology, the fractals, everything that went kind of just know that you're valuable. Know that God loves you. I'm not trying to be corny here, but genuinely consider placing your faith in Christ, trusting him like you would trust me to, if I said I was going to do something, oh, Tyler's going to release an episode next Friday. Well, I trust him, so I'll tune in. That's exactly the trust that we're talking about whenever we're saying, look, the Bible lays out who in the world God is, the triune God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, that the Father sent his Son into the world, that the Son sends the Spirit now into the world to start sanctifying those whom he died for. And it's like, even if we, and I have bouts of depression sometimes, it's not anything crazy like I need to be medicated for, so nobody needs to worry. But on the same time, like I do struggle with depression. And that's what I think about whenever I get into those modes. And so what we're trying to do here is not only like give good theology, and by all means, like what Amber put together, what Courtney and Carrie contributed to here in this episode, fascinating. This is why we encourage clergy to recommend us videos, because even if it doesn't get outside of our comfort zone, which is what, you know, we would like at the same time, obviously we don't want to talk about the same thing over and over again. But if you ask a question that one or three of us are really, really good at, it's going to be a banger episode. It's going to be an awesome episode that you should totally share with your friends and family. But at the same time, if it's not that for everybody, right, then I definitely want to give some practical advice, because I think practicality is the goal, is the end of theology and of everything. Every study that we do mentally, we want to apply that to our lives. And so I think that's the takeaway that I had from this, just realizing how God views, number one, sacred space, and then realizing that we are by God determined, that's probably a bad word to use, sanctified to be that sacred space, just shows the value. And somebody, I forget who it was talking about earlier, but how you intensified the holiness of a sacred space is by building it up, making it look prettier, right? Adding more icons, adding more statues, adding more things to use to worship the deity that temple is. But here's the cool thing now. Take that, reverse it, and apply it now to God creating us. He made us in his image. So God stuck his stamp of value on us before we were even born. That is what I want people to take away. And I appreciate everybody, you know, tuning in. I love you guys so much. My hosts, you guys are freaking awesome. I really, I couldn't do this show. We wouldn't have this kind of content without you three specifically. So Carrie, Courtney, Amber, you guys are amazing. And thank you for saying yes to my invite to come on here and start doing shows for us. I guarantee we wouldn't have 5,000 subscribers right now without you guys. So I really appreciate y'all. If you have any questions, if you are struggling in depression, or you're struggling with like just finding the sense of who you are, I've been there very, very recently. Email me, faithunaltered@gmail.com. Let me throw it up real quick. I don't know. The Lord just laid this on my heart in these last few minutes. So let me banter this out a little bit. But for real, if you struggle, or if there's something going on in your life, you don't want to talk publicly about it, that's totally cool. I, as well as every other host, Joshua Davidson, Carrie, Amber, Courtney, Jalen, now, everybody who's a part of Faith Unaltered is here, and we are willing to speak with you. If you've got a question about theology, or if you have a question about practically living like Christ, please hit us up. If you just want prayer, please ask us for it. We'll probably do the same in return, because we all need prayer. But yeah, I'd love to hear from our listeners. faithunaltered@gmail.com. Email me about anything you want. I'll talk to you about whatever, especially if it's Fortnite. Also, so now to the announcements, I guess. We have some really, really cool merch. Like, we just started giving away last week, and I just want to show images of this for those who might not have seen it. So we released merch last week. We gave some away. That is coming in. We've got everybody's sizes and everything like that. Josh has got that. And so get ready, because it's getting ready to be ordered. So the first shipment of merch is going to go out very, very soon. But so we've got hoodies. Here's a really cool Eastern Orthodox hoodie that I absolutely love, that I'm going to get as soon as I get the money to do it. No, we don't get our stuff for free, unfortunately, but yeah, I just love the Eastern Orthodox cross on the back. I believe that's the Antiochian jurisdiction, if I'm not mistaken. Faith Unaltered logo on the front, shirt pocket. Here's the favorite of everybody's for some reason. I don't know why. I think it looks I love it. It's the Cosmic Corner hoodie. Josh, he's got a thing for art, man. So I love his color scheme. I love what he's got going on with the neon. So we've got hoodies. Also, you can get all of these designs. So both that, if you like that, I really like this one. Faith Unaltered with the cross in the back. Maybe more from a Protestant mindset. I don't know. I think a Protestant could wear this too. I was a Protestant and I got these tattooed on my wrists. Coptic crosses, go figure. But nonetheless, I love them. Also, we've got long sleeve shirts. Sorry, there we go. Just picture that without the hood. We've got short sleeve shirts as well. So anything like it's totally customizable. So if you guys want anything like a Faith Unaltered logo or a Cosmic Corner huge logo on the back and a Faith Unaltered logo on the front, or a Hebrew Bible breakdown, we can do everything. So just let us know what you want. This is not the only options. And right now we're doing hoodies, t-shirts, not long sleeve shirts, sweatshirts, and mugs. And this is our cool little mug if you want to. Good night, God bless, stay like Christ. So that's our merch. If you would like to purchase some, again, email me, faithunaltered@gmail.com. We don't have a shop set up just yet. We're looking to get some orders out first, and then we're going to set up a shop on YouTube so people can easily find our shop. But for right now, if you'd like to purchase a hoodie, email me. I will shoot you costs of everything. But it's not super expensive. It's like going to Walmart and buying a hoodie. So if you can do that and you want to support us, there's another way to do it. Also, consider subscribing to our channel if you haven't yet. That's totally free. Just hit the red subscribe button on our homepage. And if you would like to, again, financially support our ministry so we can keep doing the things we do, so we can keep the lights on, the electricity bill up and going, and our internet up and going, you can do that one of like 4 or 5 ways now. So we can do super chats, super stickers, super thanks. And now I just turned on the option. I didn't know about this, but I was looking in our YouTube studio and it said you can now do gifts. I don't know what that is, but if you see something, I'm assuming it's going to say gift Faith Unaltered, then you can click that and do that as well. I'll have more info about that here in the next week whenever I actually do some research on it. Like I said, I just clicked it on and now it's there. Also, we take, if you want to do one-time donations, super stickers and super chats are a great way to do that. Super thanks too. But you can also email me, faithunaltered@gmail.com, and I will give you access to our PayPal, our Venmo, and our Cash App. You can find all of those actually in the description, but if you want to shoot me an email and ask, that's totally fine. And then I think that's all the ways you can financially support us. If you can't do that, like I said, it's not required. We like to, announce it for those who can. Obviously, it helps out our ministry abundantly. But if you can't do that, we get it. Subscribe for free. Take 2 seconds to please share this video with your friends and family on social media. Shoot them a text. Say, I saw this really awesome video on Faith Unaltered about sacred space. Y'all need to check it out. Because there's not a lot of people talking about this from my understanding on YouTube anyway. Cosmic Corner, definitely. If you like this, I would consider checking out Cosmic Corner. You can find it on our playlists on our homepage. And look out for Hebrew Bible Breakdown, hosted by Amber and Courtney themselves. Also, Pilgrims in a Holy Land is hosted by Carrie. And so if you have not seen those, Hebrew Bible Breakdown is going to release their first episode here very, very soon. And Carrie has been putting out Pilgrims in a Holy Land now forever. So just go to our playlists section on our homepage, look for the appropriate titles and click it. And then all their episodes are listed there for convenience. And look at this man. Look at this man. Look at this man. Troy, just stop being so awesome, man. There's only a slight amount of awesomeness in everyone, and you're just like gushing it. So just calm down, brother. Calm down. No, thank you, Troy. $10 super chat. Thank you all. This was epic. This is what we do, bro. And you don't have to pay us for it. You're a clergy member.
He's
Stop it.
radiating holiness now.
That's right.
He is.
Holiness is striking out from him.
I was getting ready to say, this is how you act like Christ, but I don't want to go there. We take indulgences. We will write you your IOU into heaven if you send us a $5 super chat. Also, I'll send you a bit of my sacred space. I'll gather up some sacred space and throw it in the mail for you guys if you send me a $100 super chat. No, I'm just playing. We're not going to Benny Hinn this. But no, I really appreciate everyone. Troy, you are absolutely amazing. We love doing this for you, and I can't wait to do more. The only other thing that I have is this, and Sherman, I think this should be the second part of this episode, to be perfectly honest. I think this should be our next, even if I can't remember. No, Sherman's not a member, but I don't care. I think we should do this anyway. He says, please tell me you will touch on implications of this for New Testament worship at some point. That answer's got to be yes. I think same panel, whenever we can, get together. Let's do New Testament. Let's take everything we've talked about tonight and apply it to New Testament context and how we actually benefit. We touched on that a little bit, but I think it's worth an episode. What do you guys think?
I think that I'm a clergy member, so I want to say I want to make Sherman's episode. As a clergy member, I'm requesting to make Sherman's episode.
Then that's next. So we'll get together. We'll figure out a time. And Sherman, be on the lookout for it if you're still watching. If not,
Sherman can come on and talk about it too.
Bro, I'm telling you, Sherman could probably do that. Like, you can just take my spot, bro, if you want. You can we need to do guest host month again. That was really fun. Whenever Pora did that, we'd bring on guests to actually host the show, and they could talk about whatever they wanted to. That was fun. If you want to see that, let us know in the comments. We might bring that back. Or if you all have any recommendations for how we can make this more interactive, more fun, how we can liven up our live streams or anything like that, let us know. We love taking recommendations from everybody. But that's all the banter I've got. My throat's about to give out. So Carrie, Amber, Courtney, I love you all. Thank you so much for coming on here and doing this. Thank you, Troy, for recommending this episode. It's been an absolute blast. I've enjoyed these last 3 hours here with these guys. So fun. So fun. I love it. But again, if you got any recommendations, you know the email, faithunaltered@gmail.com. And we will see you all next time. But until then, good night. God bless. And stay sacred.